There's a moment near the end of Avatar, The Last Airbender, where a 12-year-old boy is holding the most dangerous man in the world by the head, light pouring out of both of their bodies, and the entire show before this point has spent 3 full seasons telling you he is not allowed to kill him, and then he doesn't, and the show calls that a victory. And the show is right. Avatar is a story built almost entirely out of contradictions like that one. A pacifist who is also the world's most dangerous person, a wise old man who once tried to burn down a city, a blind girl who sees more clearly than anyone alive. Tonight from Ember, we are going through every one of them, the paradoxes the show resolves, the ones it leaves open, and the ones it just quietly hands to you. So get comfortable, turn the lights down low, we will be here a while, and if you have not subscribed, it really does help us keep making these. To understand why Avatar is a show about paradoxes, you have to start at the center of it, with the idea that gives the show its name. The Avatar is one soul that is reborn over and over again into the 4 nations in turn: water, earth, fire, air, water, earth, fire, air, in an unbroken cycle that has gone on, by the time the show begins, for what the characters describe as thousands of years. That is the simple version. It is the version Katara recites in the opening narration, and it is the version the show wants you to hold in your head as a kind of mantra while everything else is happening. But the longer you sit with it, the stranger it gets. Because the show then introduces you to several of those past avatars by name: Roku the Fire Sage, Kyoshi the Warrior, Kuruk the Playboy, Yangchen the Legend, and they are not one soul wearing 4 masks. They are 4 entirely different people. They speak differently, they make different decisions, they hold different values. Yangchen would have told Aang to kill Ozai without flinching. Kyoshi would have. In fact, she says she would have, and admits she has done worse. Roku would have wished he could find another way, but probably would have done it anyway. And Aang, in the end, refuses. So the question that the show keeps asking, very gently almost in the background, is what does it mean to say that those 4 people are the same person? The show never resolves this. It never really tries to. In the world of Avatar, when you sit down in the lotus position and reach inward, you can speak with the avatar before you, and through them with the one before that, and so on backwards into a chain of selves that fades into mist. They give you advice. Sometimes they argue with you. Sometimes they argue with each other. Roku and Kyoshi disagree about whether the Fire Lord should die, and you, the current avatar, sit between them with the actual decision in your hands. They are inside you, and they are also other people you can call up like elders at a difficult dinner. They remember being you, in the sense that they remember the lifetime you are about to be, but they also remember being themselves. So the avatar is both a single continuous person and a series of separate ones, and the show refuses to flatten that out into one clean answer. It is the second show in this universe, the one set generations later, that eventually offers a tidier explanation. In that later show, the Avatar's continuity is described as the work of a single benevolent spirit who first bonded with a human being long ago and has been carried forward through every lifetime since. By that telling, the past avatars are real past selves because the spirit that fused with them is the same spirit fused with you now. It is the closest the franchise ever comes to saying, here is the mechanism, here is the wire that runs through all of these lives. But that explanation belongs to the sequel. In Avatar: The Last Airbender itself, no one ever sits Aang down and gives him a metaphysics lecture. The Avatar simply is, and is one, and is many, and the show treats that as a mystery to be lived inside, rather than a puzzle to be solved. What makes this more than just a piece of world-building trivia is the way the show uses it to do something quietly radical with its protagonist. Aang is 12. He is, by any reasonable measure, the youngest and least experienced person in any room he walks into. And yet, by virtue of being the Avatar, he is also older than every other person on screen. He is older than Bumi, who is well over 100. He is older than Iroh, who has lived through wars Aang has never even heard of. He is older than the oldest tree, in a sense, because something in him remembers being the very first person who ever bent an element. Whenever the show wants to remind you of this, it does so by letting one of the past avatars surface through him, sometimes deliberately, sometimes not. And what you see in those moments is not a child playing dress-up in someone else's authority. You see a person who is genuinely many people at once, briefly speaking through one body, and then the body shrinks back into itself, and you remember he is a 12-year-old who would rather be riding his bison. This is the first paradox. and in a way it is the one all the others rest on. The avatar is the bridge between the human world and the spirit world, but to be a bridge means to belong to neither side completely. The avatar is one person and many people. The avatar is a child and an elder. The avatar is uniquely powerful and uniquely lonely, because no one else, not even another person from the same nation, can ever quite understand what it means to wake up one morning and remember being a different gender, a different age, a different temperament, in a different city, 3 lifetimes ago. Aang spends most of the series running from this. He hides in icebergs, literally and figuratively. He goofs off, he flirts with Katara, he plays with Momo, he tries to be a kid, because being a kid is the one thing he is actually allowed to be that the previous avatars never got back. And the show, very kindly, lets him. It lets him be 12 while also being 12,000. And it asks you, at the end, to accept that both of those things are true at the same time, and that the choice he makes about Ozai is a choice only this particular incarnation could have made, because only this particular incarnation is also a child who grew up in a temple that taught him all life is sacred. Roku could not have made that choice. Kyoshi would not have. Aang did, and the show implies, without ever quite saying it, that this is the whole point of the cycle. Each avatar brings something the others could not. Each avatar is, in some essential way, indispensably themselves, which takes you, naturally, to the second paradox, the one that sits at the heart of the show's ending and that fans have been arguing about for almost 20 years. Aang is a pacifist. Aang is also the most lethal person on the planet. Both of these statements are true, and the show does not let you off the hook for either one of them. From the very first time you see him, he is a boy who refuses to hurt things. He apologizes to a frog for putting it in his pocket. He refuses to firebend after he burns Katara because the idea of his power hurting someone he loves is unbearable to him. When the monks raised him, they raised him in a tradition that taught all life is sacred, and that violence done to another is violence done to yourself and to the world. He is the last of those monks. He is, in a real sense, the only person left alive who was actually taught what they taught. And the show then puts a long, slow weight on his shoulders by asking him to end the war. For most of the series, this is treated almost as a background discomfort. There is a war happening, and the war will end when the Fire Lord is no longer able to wage it. And the question of how exactly you stop a Fire Lord from being able to wage war is left politely unasked. Then, in the final stretch of the show, it comes due. Aang has to choose. He goes to each of his past lives in turn, 4 of them, and he asks each one for advice, and each one tells him, in their own way, that he has to kill Ozai. Roku says he should be decisive. Kyoshi tells him that justice and revenge are sometimes the same thing, and that he should not be afraid to take Ozai's life if that is what the world needs. Kuruk tells him to be aggressive and confront the danger directly. Yang Chen, the last air nomad avatar before Aang, tells him something even worse. That the avatar can never live an entirely spiritual life because the avatar has to put the needs of the world above their own personal sense of right. Every past life Aang has, every single one, including the airbender, tells him he has to do it. And he still says no. That is an extraordinary thing for a show to do. It is, on one level, a children's adventure story, and the simplest possible ending for a children's adventure story is for the hero to defeat the villain. There are dozens of ways the show could have arranged for Ozai to die without Aang doing it directly. A falling rock, a self-inflicted blow, a noble sacrifice by a side character. Any of those would have given the audience the catharsis of Ozai's death without staining the protagonist. The show takes none of them. Instead, it has Aang stand in front of the most powerful man in the world, at the height of his power on the night of the comet, and refuse to take his life. And then it has him win anyway. He wins by doing something nobody warned him was possible, which we will come back to. But the actual point of the show's ending, is that Aang is right and his past lives are wrong. Or rather, that he is the kind of right that only he could be. Because he is the last airbender, the last person on Earth who was raised in the tradition that taught all life is sacred, the entire weight of a vanished culture rests on whether he can hold that line when every other voice in his head, including the voices of his own previous selves, is telling him to drop it. The contradiction is sharper than that, though, because the show does not actually let him keep his hands clean. Aang has killed before, even if he did not mean to. The avatar state, when it takes him, is not a controlled thing. It is a force that uses his body to do what the world needs done. When the Fire Nation takes the Northern Water Tribe and Yue gives her life to restore the moon, Aang fuses with the ocean spirit and does something that the show does not show you in detail, but that you understand by the silence afterwards. He destroys a fleet. There are men on those ships. He does not remember it cleanly when he wakes up, and the show does not dwell on it, but it happened, and it happened by his hand. Earlier still, in his rage after losing Appa, he goes into the Avatar state and tears a hole in the desert. He hurts people. He uses powers that are not always under his control, and when he comes back to himself, he is shaken and quiet, and he does not bring it up. So the pacifist who refuses to kill Ozai is also the Avatar who has, by then, almost certainly killed many people without ever knowing their faces. That is what makes the choice at the end so heavy. It is not the choice of someone who has never had blood on their hands. It is the choice of someone who has, and who has decided that there is a difference between what happens to you when you are not yourself and what you do when you are. He could kill Ozai. He has, in a sense, killed before, but he will not choose it. And the show, by giving him a way out that does not violate that choice, blesses it. The lion turtle gives him the option to take Ozai's bending away, rather than his life, and Aang takes it, and the war ends. Whether you find that ending satisfying or whether you find it a cheat is one of the great long arguments of the fandom, and we will sit with it in its own chapter in a little while. But the contradiction stands either way. Aang is a pacifist whose role makes him a killer. He is a child raised to revere all life who is asked to end a life on behalf of the world. And the show, instead of resolving that paradox by softening one side or the other, gives him the chance to live inside it. He gets to be both. He gets to be the Avatar without ceasing to be the Airbender. And in the very last scene of the show, when he kisses Katara on a balcony at sunset, you are watching a boy who walked through fire without ever quite picking it up. If the killing question is the paradox of Aang as a person, the Avatar state is the paradox of the Avatar as a role. It is the show's most spectacular bit of imagery. Eyes glowing, tattoos shining, the sheer joy of a child suddenly able to bend all four elements at once. And it is also, when you watch the show carefully, almost always a tragedy. Almost every time the Avatar state activates on screen, something terrible has either just happened or is about to. It triggers when Aang first wakes up in the iceberg, traumatized and confused, and uses it to keep himself alive in the storm. It triggers when he sees the wreckage of the Southern Air Temple and finds the body of the monk who raised him, and he loses control so completely that the entire valley around him is wrapped in winds. It triggers when he learns about the genocide of his people, when he loses Appa, when Katara is in danger, when he sees Azula strike down a friend. It is, in almost every instance, grief made physical, or terror made physical, or fury made physical. It is what happens when the world breaks Aang badly enough that the Avatar in him takes the wheel. And the cost of it, the real cost, is something the show is very honest about. In the Avatar state, the Avatar can access the bending and wisdom of every previous life. But in the Avatar state, the Avatar is also at their most vulnerable. If the Avatar dies while in the Avatar state, the cycle breaks. There is no next Avatar. The chain that has run for thousands of years simply ends. So the very moment of greatest power is also the moment of greatest fragility. The thing that makes the Avatar useful to the world also makes the Avatar an easy target. That is the catch of the Avatar state, in one sentence. The brighter you burn, the easier you are to put out. The show does not let this be theoretical. In the Season 2 finale, Azula shoots Aang in the back with a bolt of lightning while he is in the Avatar state. Opening a chakra guru Pathik had warned him would leave him exposed if he did not finish the process. She nearly succeeds in breaking the cycle for good. Katara saves him with spirit water by the thinnest possible margin, and even so, when he wakes up, he has lost something. He cannot enter the Avatar state at will anymore. There is a block, a wall of fear and pain and unresolved grief, between him and that power. For most of the third book, he cannot reach it. He has to take the Fire Lord on without it, until the very last moment, when a stray rock to the back hits the same scar and unblocks the chakra and brings the state surging back. It is, on a writerly level, a clean piece of plotting. It is also a quiet way of saying that the Avatar state is a gift the Avatar cannot fully own. It is given and taken away, opened and blocked, by accident, by injury, by spiritual readiness, by the world's need. The Avatar does not control it any more than a river controls its own flood. So what the show keeps showing you, over and over, is a boy who has the most powerful state in the world inside him, who can level a fleet or carve a canyon out of the desert when he is angry enough, and who is, in himself, gentle and frightened and trying very hard not to need it. The contradiction is plain. The most powerful person on Earth is also the one most likely to be hurt by his own power. The Avatar state is the show's way of saying, you do not get strength for free. You get it tied to grief. You get it tied to vulnerability. You get it on a fuse that, if it is lit at the wrong moment, will burn the whole chain down with you on it. Which brings us, finally, to the most controversial paradox in the entire series, and the one that the show resolves so neatly and so suddenly that some people have never forgiven it: the lion turtle and the gift of energy bending. For 3 full seasons, the show has been building toward an impossible question. Aang has to defeat Ozai. Aang refuses to kill Ozai. There is no obvious third option. Then, in the last handful of episodes, a creature the size of a small mountain emerges from the sea, an ancient lion turtle that no one in the cast has ever seen before, and it carries Aang on its back through the night and speaks to him. It tells him something that the show implies has been forgotten for thousands of years, that before there was bending of the 4 elements, there was a different kind of bending, the bending of the energy within a person. And it tells him that to bend another person's energy, your own spirit must be unbendable, or you will be consumed and corrupted by the energy of the person you are trying to change. Aang listens. He does not understand it all. The lion turtle disappears back into the sea, and the show carries on toward its climax. It is a famously divisive solution. There is a school of thought that says the lion turtle is a deus ex machina, a literal machine of a god lowered onto the stage at the last minute to give the hero a way out of the corner the writers wrote him into. It is hard to argue with that read on a structural level. The lion turtle has been hinted at once, very briefly, in a single line of dialogue earlier in the 3rd book, and otherwise, it is a creature the audience has never met until it shows up to hand Aang the keys to the ending. There is no foreshadowing of energy bending as a concept. There is no build-up, no training montage, no test run. He uses it once, on the most powerful firebender alive, and it works. That is, on the face of it, the textbook definition of a contrived ending. But there is another way to read it, and the show, in its quieter moments, seems to be inviting it. The lion turtle is not really an answer, it is a permission. Aang already knew he did not want to kill Ozai. Aang was already trying to find another way. He had spent the previous several episodes wandering by himself, doing nothing but turn the question over in his head, refusing to train, refusing to plan, because none of the plans on the table were ones he could live with. The lion turtle does not give him a magic weapon. It gives him a possibility. And then, it gives him a condition. To use this, your own spirit must be unbendable. If you try to take Ozai's bending, and you waver, you will lose. Your spirit will be consumed by his. The fight, when it comes, is not really a fight about who is stronger. It is a fight about whose will is purer. Ozai's will is enormous, and it is fed by a comet that has multiplied his firebending 100-fold. Aang's will is, on paper, much smaller. A child with a long staff and a quiet heart against the most powerful man in the world. What the show does in those last few minutes is take that tension and resolve it without breaking either side. Aang takes Ozai's bending. Ozai's spirit pushes back. There is a long, agonized moment where Aang's energy turns blue and Ozai's energy turns orange, and the two of them are wrestling for which one will overwrite the other. And what wins is not Aang's power, but Aang's certainty. He has decided. He has chosen not to kill. He has chosen this. The unbendable spirit is the spirit of a person who has made the hardest possible choice and is sticking to it. And so the lion turtle, in the end, is not a cheat code. It is a recognition that the world has, all along, contained a third option for someone who is willing to be the kind of person who would refuse the first two. The contradiction of the pacifist who has to end a war is resolved not by the writers inventing a new ability, but by the writers honoring the fact that the pacifist has earned it. That is the kindest possible reading of that ending, and on a slow night, with the lights low, it is the one I find I keep coming back to. If Aang is the paradox the show is built around, it is the paradox the show keeps in its pocket. He is, on the surface, the gentle uncle. He sells tea. He plays a string instrument badly. He sings on rooftops and hugs his nephew and quotes proverbs about the courage to be soft. He is, in your memory of the show, the warmest character on screen, a kind of grandfather to the entire audience. And he is also, by the time you meet him, a man who spent 600 days laying siege to the largest city in the world, who let the world believe he had killed the last of its dragons, who was once known across the 4 nations as the Dragon of the West, and was on a clear path to becoming the next Fire Lord of a Fire Nation in the middle of a war of conquest. Both of those people are him. The show does not pretend they are not. This is one of the things Avatar does that almost no other show of its kind would dare to do. It allows a character to be both forgiven and accountable. Iroh is not redeemed by being secretly good all along. He was not a sleeper agent for peace, planted in the Fire Nation military by the spirits to one day defect. He was a real general, in a real army, doing real harm in a real war. He laid siege to Ba Sing Se for almost 2 years. He breached the outer wall. He was, by the standards of his nation, the most successful military commander of his generation. And the show, when it tells you this, does not flinch. It shows you flashbacks of him in his armor, leading his troops, smiling in front of a celebratory crowd. It shows you that he was good at it. It shows you that he liked it. What changes him is not a vision or a spirit or a sudden religious conversion. It is the death of his son. Lu Ten dies at Ba Sing Se. The show never quite tells you exactly how, but the timing is clear. This was the war Iroh was winning, and the cost of winning was his only child. He withdraws from the siege almost immediately afterwards. He goes on a long journey into the spirit world. He comes back a different man, and the rest of his life, by the time you meet him, is essentially an act of penance, although he would never use that word. He travels with his nephew, the disgraced exiled prince, on a ship that nobody else wanted. He pretends, in front of the crew, to be a foolish old man who likes his tea too much. He gives advice that gets ignored. He waits. The strange thing is that the gentleness is real, and so is the past. He is not pretending to be soft. He has become soft. He has done the work, decades of it, of choosing patience and humility and kindness over the things that came naturally to him. But the things that came naturally to him are still in there. When he needs to fight, he fights like a man who used to be the most feared general on his continent. When the time comes, in the very last episodes, and his White Lotus comrades reclaim Ba Sing Se, he walks back into the city he once tried to destroy and takes it from the Fire Nation by himself, almost. He is fully capable of the violence he has spent the rest of his life moving away from. He just does not choose it anymore, except when the world asks him to. And even then, he does it with a kind of sadness that suggests he remembers what it costs. What makes Iroh moving, rather than tragic, is that the show does not punish him for his past. It does not have him die in atonement, or refuse him his nephew's love, or arrange for some former victim to show up and demand restitution. It simply lets him live as a person who has done terrible things and has spent the long second half of his life trying to do good ones. The contradiction is left intact. The Dragon of the West is also the Tea Uncle. The Tea Uncle is also the Dragon of the West. He contains both. And the show suggests, very gently, that this is actually the only real path to redemption that anyone gets, in this world or any other. You do not stop being the person you were. You add to it. You become a larger self, with the bad you did still inside you, choosing every day not to do it again. Iroh is the show's clearest argument that a person can grow without forgetting, that you can hold your own crimes and still be a good man, that wisdom is not the absence of having done wrong, but the deep, settled refusal to do it twice. It also means, when he gives advice to Zuko, that the advice has weight. Iroh is not a saint lecturing a sinner. Iroh is a former sinner gently warning a current sinner about the road he is on. When he tells Zuko that the man he is becoming is not the man he has to be, that line lands because Iroh has been the man Zuko is becoming, and he knows what waits for that man down the line. The mentorship between them is the deepest relationship in the show, and the reason it is the deepest is that it is built on shared darkness. Iroh does not love Zuko the way a clean man loves a dirty boy. He loves him the way an older brother who has been to prison loves a younger brother who is heading there. He recognizes him, he sees himself. And the patience he has for Zuko, the bottomless and almost frustrating patience, is the patience of a man who knows from experience that change can happen, but only in its own time. and only when the person is finally tired enough of themselves to want it. This is what makes the moment in the Earth Kingdom, when Zuko finally turns against him under Azula's influence, so devastating. Iroh has poured every shred of himself into this boy. He has given him everything he learned from Lu Ten's death. He has, in some real sense, treated Zuko as a second chance at being a father. And Zuko picks Azula. He leaves Iroh in a prison cell. He goes home to the Fire Lord and pretends, for a while, that this is the life he wanted. And Iroh, in that cell, does not curse him. He does not call out to him. He waits. He gets stronger. He sits in his quiet for months on end, building his body and his spirit back, because he knows, with the certainty of someone who has been through it, that the boy will come back. And the boy does. And when the boy comes back, sobbing and broken and apologizing in fragments that do not even form whole sentences, Iroh does not lecture him. He just holds him. That is Iroh in one image, the most dangerous old man in the world, holding his nephew like a child, after years of being betrayed and imprisoned, and saying nothing at all about it. Which brings us to Zuko, who is, in a way, a paradox you can see from space. He is the only character in the show who gets his own redemption arc as a primary line of the story, and he is also the character around whom the most intricate paradox in the entire series is built. Zuko's whole identity is constructed around the pursuit of his honor. He has lost it. He must regain it. He believes, with the intensity of a teenager who has been told the same lie by every adult in his life, that his honor was taken from him when his father burned half of his face for the crime of speaking out of turn, and that the only way to get it back is to do what his father told him to do, which is to capture the Avatar and bring him home. That is the engine that drives his entire first season. It is the reason he is on the boat. It is the reason he chases a 12-year-old around the world. What makes this a riddle is that his honor was never taken from him. His honor, by any reasonable definition of the word, was demonstrated in the very act for which he was punished. He spoke out in a war council against a plan that would have used inexperienced soldiers as bait. That was the honorable thing to do. His father punished him for it, because his father has a different definition of honor, one that means obedience, conformity, the willingness to throw lives away for victory. Zuko has spent his entire life chasing a version of honor that, if he ever caught it, would mean ceasing to be the kind of person who deserved honor in the first place. The thing he is running toward is the thing that will erase him, and he does not see this. For 3 seasons, he does not see this. He cannot see this. The grief and shame are too thick. The contradiction sharpens because at one point, in the middle of the second book, he gets exactly what he thinks he wants. He defeats his sister in the throne room, sort of. He helps her take Ba Sing Se. He comes home as the prince who recaptured the city his uncle could not. The prince who was right to chase the Avatar. The prince whose father finally, after years, looks at him with something that could be mistaken for pride. He sleeps in his old bed. He walks through palace gardens he had not seen since he was a child. He has, in every objective measure, achieved his quest, and it does not feel like anything. He says, almost in those words, that he should feel happy, and he does not. He has spent his life running toward this room, and now that he is in it, the room is empty. The honor he was promised was never a real object. It does not exist where he was told it would be. He has caught the shadow, and the shadow is, on inspection, made of nothing. And then, in the third book, having spent half a season pretending to be content, he finally does the thing that actually constitutes his redemption, which is also the thing his entire culture has trained him to call dishonor. He walks into his father's throne room and he speaks against him, loudly, clearly, the same way he once did, as a child, in the war council, the night he was burned. And this time he does not get burned, because he is older and stronger, and has already taken the worst the world can give him. But the act itself is the same act. He chooses honor the way he understands it, which is also the way his uncle understands it, which is the way the show understands it, over the version of honor his father offered him. He chooses to be banished a second time, voluntarily. He chooses to be on the wrong side of his nation's idea of itself. The deeper truth of Zuko is that the thing he was searching for was already in him, on the night it was taken. He was honorable the moment he spoke up against the use of those soldiers as bait. He has been honorable, in his quiet way, the whole time. He just could not believe it, because he had been told over and over by the people whose love he wanted that he was not. His arc is not really about gaining honor. It is about learning to recognize that he had it all along, and that the people who told him he had lost it were lying, sometimes deliberately, and sometimes because they had been lied to too. He has to stop chasing a version of himself that someone else designed for him, and start being the version of himself that he actually is. And the show, in giving him that ending, makes him one of the most fully realized characters in the medium. He is the boy who finally turns to look at the thing chasing him and realizes it was his own shadow all along. The honor he was chasing was the part of himself he kept stepping on while he ran. Azula, his sister, is the opposite figure, and in some ways the harder one to talk about, because the show is so careful with her. From the moment you meet her, she is presented as the perfect Fire Nation princess. She is brilliant, she is graceful. She is, by any normal metric, the success story of her family. She can produce blue fire, which is hotter than ordinary fire, and which the show implies is a sign of extraordinary skill. She can shoot lightning, which is one of the most difficult firebending techniques in the world. She is a strategist. She is fluent in manipulation. She is the favorite child of the most powerful man on the continent. She is, on paper, the person Zuko has spent his life wishing he could be. And she is also, when you look at her closely, the most frightened person in the show. What is hard to see at first is that her perfection is the trap. Azula has built herself, brick by brick, into the daughter her father wanted, because she understood very early that her father loved her conditionally, and that the condition was excellence. She has interpreted every interaction she has ever had through the lens of strategy, because to do otherwise would be to risk losing the love she has paid so much to earn. She has cultivated her cruelty because cruelty was rewarded in her household. She has cultivated her control because control was the only thing in her household that was safe. And the result is that she is genuinely brilliant and genuinely terrifying, and also entirely hollow, because there is no Azula behind the performance. The performance is Azula. There is no person inside it for anyone to know, including her. This becomes unbearably clear in the third book, in an episode set on a Fire Nation beach. She is on holiday. Her father has sent her and her friends and her brother to a luxury resort. She has nothing to do. There is no plan to execute, no enemy to corner, no plot to manage, and she falls apart. She does not know how to talk to a boy she finds attractive without scaring him. She does not know how to make small talk. She does not know how to relax. Her friends are her friends only because they fear her. She is 16 and she has never once in her life had a friendship that was not also a transaction. By the end of that episode, she is sitting on the sand telling her companions, with a strange flat honesty, that her mother thought she was a monster. And she is right. Her mother did think that. Her mother loved Zuko, the imperfect one, the soft one, in a way she could never love Azula, and Azula has carried that, all these years, under the perfect surface, the conviction that the woman who was supposed to love her unconditionally had quietly decided that she was not worth loving. The spiral tightens like this. The more perfect she becomes, the less anyone can reach her, and the less anyone can reach her, the more frightened she becomes, and the more frightened she becomes, the more perfect she has to become to keep the fear at bay. By the time you reach the finale, she is unraveling. Her friends have left her. Her father has cast her out of his plans by elevating himself to a higher title and giving her the empty crown of Fire Lord. Her hair, which has always been impeccable, starts to come loose. Her blue fire, which has always been the visible sign of her control, begins to flicker into orange under stress. She is hallucinating her mother in mirrors. She is alone. And when Zuko finally faces her in a one-on-one fight, what defeats her is not his skill, it is her own fracture. She redirects her lightning at Katara because she cannot bear the idea of a fair fight. And Katara, who is not a firebender at all, defeats her with water and chains and the kind of patient practicality that Azula has never been taught to value. The last image of Azula in the show is one of the saddest things in any children's program. She is on her knees, chained to a grate, weeping uncontrollably, her hair a mess, her perfect makeup smeared, breathing fire into the empty sky. She has lost. She has lost not because Zuko was better than her, although in that moment he was, but because she had nothing left inside her to lose. The cruelty of Azula is that the version of herself she built to win the war was the version of herself most likely to lose it. The control she was praised for is the control that broke her. The fear that drove her to perfection is the fear that, in the end, perfection could never quiet. She is the show's quiet argument that there is no such thing as a perfect person. Only people who have not yet been pushed hard enough to discover what they are made of, and that for some of them, What they are made of is grief no one ever helped them name. The air nomads have a contradiction at the center of them too, and it is the one the show is the gentlest about, because the air nomads are also the people the show is the saddest about. The teaching that defines them, the one Aang inherited and the one he tries, with mixed success, to live out across the series, is the teaching of non-attachment. The air nomads do not own property. They do not have permanent homes in the way the other nations do. They live in temples high on mountains and float between them on the wind. They are, in their official self-description, the most spiritually free of the four peoples, because they have learned to let things go. Attachment, in their teaching, is the root of suffering. To love a thing so much that you cannot bear to lose it is to set yourself up for a kind of pain that will eat you. So you love lightly, you hold loosely, you let the wind take what it takes. And yet the show, over and over, shows you air nomads who are attached. Aang is attached. He loves Appa with an intensity that borders on the religious. When Appa is taken from him in the second book, he loses his composure so completely that he tears the desert open and threatens to abandon his friends to find his bison. He loves Katara with an intensity that the show treats as romantic but also as something deeper, a kind of clinging that grows out of the fact that she was the first person to find him after 100 years. He loves the monk who raised him. He loves Momo. He loves his memories of his people so much that he cannot quite bring himself to acknowledge, for most of the show, that they are actually gone. He is not a detached person. He is, in fact, one of the most attached people in the show. He just happens to be the only living member of a culture that taught him this was the wrong way to be. Monk Gyatso, when you meet him in flashback, is no more detached than Aang. He loves Aang the way a grandfather loves a grandson he is raising. He hides Aang's identity as the Avatar from the Council for as long as he can, not because he disagrees with the Council's reasoning, but because he cannot bear the thought of having Aang taken away from him to be trained at another temple. He breaks an entire culture's tradition out of love, and when the temple is attacked, he dies fighting, surrounded by the bodies of firebenders. The show, in a single quiet shot in the second book, lets you see his skeleton, still in the lotus position, surrounded by skulls. He took some of them with him, the most peaceful man in the world, in his final moments, killed in defense of a child he loved too much to send away. The way out, which the show works towards slowly, is that the teaching of non-attachment is, when you look at it carefully, not really a teaching about not loving things. It is a teaching about not gripping things, and those are different. The air nomads love their children, and their lemurs, and their bison, and their temples, and each other. They just held them in a way that allowed them to come and go. Aang struggles with this his entire life, because he was a child when the people who could have shown him what the difference looked like in practice were taken from him. He has to figure it out himself, with no one alive to teach him. And what he figures out, slowly, painfully, is that the way to honor their teaching is not to stop loving Katara or Appa or his memories, but to love them in a way that does not make him a slave to them. To love them and still let the world be larger than his love for them. To love them and still be able to make the choice, when the moment comes, to do the right thing rather than the thing his heart wants. The guru in the second book tries to walk him through this directly. He tells Aang that he has to let Katara go, that his attachment to her is blocking the last chakra and keeping him from full mastery of the Avatar state. Aang refuses. He literally gets up from the meditation pose and flies away. The show treats this, at the time, as a tragedy. The choice costs him the ability to enter the Avatar state at will, costs him nearly his life in the season finale, costs the world its strongest weapon at the moment of greatest need, and it is a tragedy. But the show also, by the end of the series, suggests that the guru was not entirely right. Aang does not, in the end, need to stop loving Katara. He needs to love her in a way that is part of being who he is, rather than the whole of who he is. The air nomad teaching, properly understood, is not about ceasing to love. It is about loving without losing the rest of yourself. And that is something Aang has to teach himself, on his own, the last child of a vanished people, working out what they actually meant from the inside. That is the lesson the show holds the most tenderly. Non-attachment is not detachment. It is a specific, hard-earned kind of love that knows how to hold and how to let go, both, in the right proportions, at the right times. The air nomads did not get to teach this to the world. They were almost entirely killed before they could. And Aang, alone with their books and his fading memories, has to translate it for the next generation in his own voice. Whether he gets it right is not really for us to say. The show ends before we can see, but we get to see him try. Fire in this show has the same kind of contradiction running through it that the air nomads do, but pointed in the opposite direction. In the popular imagination of the world Aang has woken up into, firebending is a power for destroying. The Fire Nation has spent 100 years using it to burn villages and topple cities. By the time we meet the rest of the world, when they see fire, they see fear. Katara, who is from a tribe that has lost most of its people to this power, is the most direct about it. She tells Aang explicitly, in the early episodes, that he should not even try to firebend. She does not want him near it. And Aang, after he burns her in a training accident, comes to feel the same way for a long time. Fire becomes, in the show's first book and most of its second, an element that even the Avatar is afraid of. What the show then does, very slowly, is correct this. It introduces you to firebenders who are not Fire Nation soldiers. Zhang, the firebending master who tries to teach Aang in the first book, is the first hint. He is a deserter. He left the Fire Nation army because he had come to believe that fire, used the way his country teaches it to be used, is a betrayal of what firebending actually is. He tells Aang, before the lesson goes wrong, that fire is alive, that it eats and breathes, that a firebender's responsibility is to control it, because it does not have the natural restraint of water or earth. Fire, in Zhang's teaching, is not the element of cruelty, it is the element of life, of energy, of warmth, and using it for destruction is a perversion of the thing itself. This idea sits quietly under the rest of the show, waiting. It comes back in the third book, when Aang and Zuko go looking for the source of firebending and find the Sun Warriors. The Sun Warriors are an entire civilization of firebenders that the world believed had been wiped out generations ago. They are still there. They have been there the whole time, hidden, because they knew, long before anyone else did, that the Fire Nation had taken their gift and twisted it. And what they teach Aang and Zuko, with the help of the two surviving dragons, is that the original firebending was not a weapon at all. It was a dance, a celebration, a way of channeling the sun's life into a human being's hands. The Fire Nation's firebending, the version Aang has been afraid of his whole life, is fire that has lost its source. It is fire fueled by anger, by greed, by the will to dominate. Fire fueled by life, by warmth, by joy, looks completely different. It is the same element. It is being used by a person who remembers what it is for. The hidden truth is that the element the world has been most frightened of is, in its true nature, the element of life. Without fire, there is no warmth, no cooking, no heat for the cold months, no metal made from rock. The sun, which is fire, makes the plants grow that feed every other element's people. Fire is not the opposite of life. Fire is the source of it. And the Fire Nation, for 100 years, has been using a gift of life as an instrument of death, and has been teaching their own children that this is what fire is. Iroh, in the way fans tend to remember him, leaves Zuko with the idea that fire is life, not just destruction. He says it casually, almost as a side comment. But it is, in the larger architecture of the show, one of the most important lines anyone speaks. It is the show's correction of 100 years of propaganda. It is the show, through the gentlest character it has, telling you that the most feared element in the world is also the most generous one, when it is held by a hand that remembers. The full meaning of this lands on Zuko at the moment he has to relearn his bending in the third book. He has gone through his crisis. He has switched sides. He has joined Aang and his friends, and he discovers, to his horror, that his firebending has gotten weaker. He cannot generate the heat he used to. His flames have shrunk. He is, in some embarrassing sense, a worse firebender than he was when he was angry. And it is only after the journey to the Sun Warriors that he understands why. His firebending, for years, had been fueled by hate, by shame, by the desperate hunger to prove himself to his father. When he stopped hating, his fire stopped burning. He had been using the wrong fuel, and now that he had walked away from it, there was nothing to feed the flame. The Sun Warriors and the dragons teach him a different fuel, one that does not require him to be angry to be powerful. They teach him that the original firebenders drew their fire from life, from breath, from the recognition that fire is a gift. And his firebending, when he draws it from that source instead, comes back stronger than it has ever been. The flame he generates afterwards is the kind of flame the original masters made, fueled not by rage but by being alive. That is the reversal the show plants in Fire, and it pays off in a series of small ways across the entire third book. The firebenders who are the most powerful in the end are not the ones who are the angriest. Ozai is enormously powerful, but the source of his power is the Comet, an external boost, a borrowed strength. Without the Comet, his fire is impressive but ordinary. Aang's firebending, by the end, is competent but not exceptional. Zuko's firebending, by the end, is the strongest it has ever been, because he has finally stopped using it to express his pain. He has started using it to express his joy at being alive. The element that the world has feared is, in its true form, an instrument of celebration. And the show, in one of its quietest reversals, asks you to leave the series no longer afraid of fire. That kind of seeing past the surface, by the way, is the heart of the next paradox we should talk about, because Toph is, in a real and literal sense, the character who proves that what the eye reports is not the whole world. Toph is blind. She was born blind. Her family, the Beifongs, are wealthy beyond what most of the cast can imagine, and they have spent her whole life treating her blindness as a kind of small, polite tragedy that must be hidden from the public. She is, in their version of her, a fragile little girl who must be protected from the world. She is rolled out at parties so the guests can see how well she is being cared for. She is not allowed to leave the house unaccompanied. She is, in their well-meaning custody, essentially a prisoner. And she is also, when nobody is looking, the most powerful earthbender in the world. The strange beauty of Toph is that the thing her family thinks of as her weakness is in fact the thing that made her great. She was the first person in the world to truly bend the earth, because she was the first earthbender who learned from the original earthbenders, the badger moles, who are themselves blind. The badger moles do not need to see because they feel the world through the earth. Every vibration, every footstep, every shift of weight is information. Toph, who could not see in the conventional sense, was open to that kind of seeing in a way no one else was. The other earthbenders learned to bend the earth by watching it. Toph learned to bend the earth by becoming part of it. She feels the world the way the badger moles do, through her feet, through the ground, through the slight tremors of every living thing within range. She knows where Aang is by the way his weight presses the floor. She knows when Sokka is lying by the way his heart speeds up. She is, in a real sense, more aware of her surroundings than any sighted person in the show. Her blindness is not a deficit she has overcome. It is the doorway through which her gift came. That is the surface story. The deeper one is that her parents, in their effort to protect her, were actively keeping her from the only life she could have lived as a whole person. Their love for her was real. It was also suffocating. They had decided who she could be without ever asking her, and the version of her they were willing to love was a version that did not actually exist. The Toph that was alive in her was someone they had never met. When she runs away with Aang, she is not running from cruelty. She is running from kindness misapplied. She is running from a version of love that was, in practice, a small, soft cage. The thing that makes Toph more than just a clever piece of writing is that the show allows her to be difficult. She is rude. She is loud. She picks fights with Katara. She refuses to be the gentle blind girl her family wanted. But she also refuses to be the brave, inspiring blind girl that a different kind of show might have made her. She is just a person, with a temper, with a sense of humor that runs to the cruel, with an appetite for victory, with the kind of pride that gets her into trouble and out of it in equal measure. She is allowed to be a kid who is not always likable, and the show frames this, very gently, as one of the gifts of her blindness. She does not have to manage the way she looks to other people because she cannot see how they look back. She does not have to perform for an audience she cannot perceive. She gets to be, in the most literal possible way, herself. And the version of herself that emerges when the cage is opened is brash and brilliant and tender in unexpected places, and exactly nothing like the daughter her parents thought they were raising. Her story feeds into the show's larger argument about perception. The Earth Kingdom is the kingdom of seeing in some ways. The Earthbenders rely on a stance, on watching the opponent, on knowing the terrain. The Fire Nation is the kingdom of acting first. The Water Tribes are the kingdom of adapting. The Air Nomads are the kingdom of evading. Each element has its own approach to seeing the world. And the show puts at the center of its earthbending storyline a girl who cannot see at all, and asks you to consider whether maybe seeing has been overrated all along. Maybe the people who think they see clearly are missing the most important things. Maybe Long Feng, who sees with his eyes and uses his Dai Li to control the city, is blinder than Toph in any sense that matters. Maybe Ozai, who is convinced he sees the world as it really is the most blind man on the continent, because he cannot perceive the people in front of him as anything other than instruments. And maybe Toph, in her dirt, in her loud, rude, joyful certainty, sees more of the truth than any of them. The show does not state this in so many words. It does not need to. Every time Toph drops her foot to the ground and listens, the show is making the argument. If Toph is the paradox of seeing without sight, Sokka is the paradox of leading without power. He is the only member of the main group who cannot bend. He is, in a world of people who can manipulate the 4 classical elements with their hands, just a guy with a boomerang. The show, on its surface, treats this as a comic premise. He is the practical one, the science guy, the planner, the boy whose role in the group dynamic is to crack jokes and worry out loud about whether their plan will work. And he is, beat by beat, episode by episode, one of the most important people in the show. The shape of it is this. He is the leader of a group whose other members can move mountains. Aang is the avatar. Katara is, by the end of the show, possibly the most powerful waterbender alive. Toph is the most powerful earthbender alive, and the inventor of metal bending. Zuko, when he joins, is the prince of the Fire Nation. Suki is a trained Kyoshi warrior. And Sokka, who has a piece of bone he throws, is the person who plans most of their operations. He plans the invasion of the Fire Nation. He plans the prison break. He plans the escape from the boiling rock. He is, in the way that armies have always defined leadership, the actual leader of this group. The Benders defer to him in the planning sessions. They argue with him sometimes, but they listen, and the show takes this entirely seriously. It does not, at any point, treat his lack of bending as a real disadvantage. It treats it as a fact about him that he has had to work around, in the same way Toph has had to work around her blindness, and it shows you, with quiet respect, the kinds of things he has had to learn to make himself useful. He has read books, he has studied maps, he has watched his sister and his friend learn things he cannot learn, and instead of becoming bitter about it, he has paid attention to how their abilities work, what their limits are, where the seams are in the way bending interacts with the world. He has, in essence, become the engineer of the group. When they need a balloon to fly into enemy territory, he builds one. When they need to know which day the comet is coming, he is the one who has done the maths. When they need a plan to break into the boiling rock, he is the one who has talked to the right people, mapped the layout, identified the cooldown points where they can hide. The show, in the 3rd book, even gives him a brief weapon mastering arc, where he goes to a master swordsmith and learns to forge a blade from the metal of a fallen meteor and to fight with it as competently as anyone else on screen. By the end, he is not a useless human standing next to a group of superhumans. He is a fully trained warrior who happens to be a sword fighter rather than a bender, and the show has made the case, by then, that the difference does not matter very much. What is paradoxical about all of this is that the show could so easily have made Sokka pitiful. The standard treatment of a non-magical character in a magical group is either to ignore them entirely or to keep them as the comic relief and never let them be taken seriously. Avatar does the opposite. It uses Sokka's lack of bending as a chance to ask a more interesting question, which is, what does it actually mean to be useful in a war? The Benders are spectacular. They can do things ordinary humans cannot. But a war is not won by spectacle. A war is won by logistics, by timing, by intelligence, by leadership, by the willingness of one person to stay calm when everyone else is panicking. And Sokka is the calm one. Sokka is the one who keeps watching the calendar. Sokka is the one who sees the broader picture and is willing to lose an argument now in order to set up a win 3 steps later. He is the show's argument that power is not the same thing as leadership, and that a world in which only the most powerful are allowed to make decisions is a world that will collapse in on itself the moment a problem arises that cannot be punched. His relationship to bending also lets the show say something quietly important about gender and grief, although it does not draw a circle around it. His mother was killed by a Fire Nation raid when he was a child. His father left to fight in the war when he was barely a teenager. The men of his tribe followed his father into the war and left the South Pole almost entirely to women and children. Sokka was, briefly, the oldest male left in the village. He took that responsibility seriously even as he was visibly too young for it. He had spent his early years building forts and drilling himself in pretend warrior poses, because that was what was available to him. He had decided, before he had any business deciding such a thing, that he was going to be the man of the house. And then his sister turned out to be a waterbender, and a powerful one, and he had to learn very quickly that protecting her was going to look different than he had imagined, because she did not need to be protected in the way he had been picturing. She was, in many fights, the more capable one. And the show, in showing you Sokka work through that and come out the other side as her friend rather than her keeper, gives you one of the warmest sibling relationships in any animated show. His quiet gift, in the end, is that the boy who had no power was the one who had the clearest sense of what to do with the powers other people had. He is the show's quietest hero, and the only reason he is not louder about it is that he is, in his own self-description, just a guy with a boomerang. Katara, his sister, is a nod of a different kind, and one the show treats with more weight than it sometimes gets credit for. She is, on the surface, the heart of the group, the maternal figure, the one who keeps the others fed and warm and emotionally tended to. She is also, when the show is honest with her, 14 years old. She is a child who lost her mother at 6, watched her father leave at 12, and then took on the role of mother to the entire community, more or less by default. By the time we meet her, she has been doing this so long that she does not really know how to be a person who is not also a caretaker. She cooks, she does laundry, she manages emotional crises, she speaks for the group in difficult conversations, she picks up after Sokka, and after Aang, and eventually after Toph. And she does all of this while also training to become one of the most powerful waterbenders in the world, while also processing her own grief, while also being, somewhere underneath all of it, a teenage girl with a teenage girl's interior life that almost nobody on screen ever fully asks about. The price of Katara, you might say, is that the trait the show often celebrates her for, her capacity to care, is also the trait that has cost her her childhood. The show, when it stops to look at her closely, knows this. There is a moment in the second book where, exhausted and overwhelmed, she snaps at the group that she is not their mother. She is right, and she is also kidding herself. She has been their mother in everything but biology, and they have all accepted that without ever thinking very hard about whether it was fair. There is a moment in the third book where she takes a journey, alone with Zuko, to find the man who killed her mother. She tracks him down. She brings him to his knees. She does not, in the end, kill him. But the version of her that walks into that confrontation, the one with eyes flat and cold and bloodbending in her sleeves, is a version of her the show has been letting you glimpse since the first book, and her capacity for that kind of fury is the same capacity that allows her to love so fiercely the rest of the time. The thing that makes her tender is the thing that makes her dangerous. She is also, although the show is careful about how it handles this, the most morally serious character in the group. Aang has his pacifism, which is a religious inheritance. Sokka has his loyalty, which is a personal inheritance. Toph has her honesty, which is, for her, a kind of practical convenience. Katara has her sense of justice, and her sense of justice was forged in personal loss, which means it is the most personal of the moral compasses on screen. When she sees cruelty, she does not respond with theory. She responds with her body. She walks toward it. She has, in a small village in the Earth Kingdom in the third book, almost the entire crew of a Fire Nation prison ship turned against itself in 20 minutes, because she would rather throw herself into the fight than walk past it. She has, in the Northern Water Tribe in the first book, fought Master Paku to a draw and forced him to teach her after he refused on the grounds that women do not fight. She is the show's quiet revolutionary, although she does not call herself that. She moves through the world correcting injustices as she finds them, sometimes with diplomacy, sometimes with ice, but always with the same underlying assumption that things should be fair, and that if she is the only one in the room who is willing to insist on that, then she will be the one. The other side of this is that the very thing that makes her this person, her early grief, is also what makes her old before her time. She is 14, and she is also, in some terrible way, 40. She has had to do calculations about food rationing that no 14-year-old should have to do. She has had to comfort her father about his wife's death when she was still a child herself. She has had to be the calm one in the room when there was no other calm one available. And the show, in giving her her romance with Aang at the end, gives her something she has not had in any of the seasons we have watched. which is the chance to be a girl rather than a mother. Whether she takes it, whether she lets herself be loved as a girl rather than as a function, is a question the show does not fully answer before it ends. But the door is open. The cage of premature responsibility is, for the first time, propped slightly ajar. The friendship of Roku and Sozin, which the show devotes an entire episode to in the third book, called The Avatar and the Fire Lord, is one of those small jewels of writing that the show drops in your lap and leaves you to think about for years. It is the story of how the world ended, told through one friendship. Roku, the Avatar before Aang, and Sozin, the Fire Lord who started the war, were born on the same day. They grew up together. They were as close as brothers. They went to each other's weddings. They held each other's children. And they, the two of them together, made the decisions that led directly to the genocide of the air nomads and the war that would consume 100 years. The way the show tells this story is unsparing and patient. Sozin, even as a young man, has the seed of his idea already in him. He believes that the Fire Nation has grown so prosperous and so advanced that it has a duty to share its prosperity with the rest of the world. He tells Roku this in a quiet conversation on a balcony, late at night. He does not present it as conquest, he presents it as generosity. The Fire Nation has so much, he says. Why should not the other nations have some of it too? Roku, in that moment, refuses him. He tells him that the four nations exist as they exist for a reason, that the balance between them is sacred, and that any attempt to share Fire Nation prosperity by force would violate the very thing the Avatar is meant to preserve. Sozin backs down. The conversation ends. The friendship continues. The cruel thing is that nothing about this conversation actually changed anything. Roku said no. Sozin agreed. And Sozin proceeded, over the following years, to begin doing exactly what Roku had told him not to do. He started annexing Earth Kingdom territory. He started moving Fire Nation citizens into other nations. He started, in small ways, building the machine that would eventually become the war. And Roku, who was Sozin's best friend, did not notice for a long time. He was busy. He had his own life. He had a wife and children. The world was complicated. And by the time he did notice, the machine was halfway built, and his oldest friend was at the center of it. What follows is one of the most uncomfortable confrontations in the show. Roku arrives at Sozin's palace in full Avatar state, having seen the colonies, having seen what his friend has done. He almost destroys the throne room. He spares Sozin's life with the warning that if Sozin continues, the next visit will not be a warning, and Sozin agrees. He pulls back. The friendship is over, but the war machine seems, for a time, to have been stopped. The two of them never speak again on warm terms. The childhood friendship is, in any meaningful sense, finished. And then Roku dies, in a volcanic eruption on his own island, and Sozin, who has come to help him, watches the volcano take him. He could have saved him. He chooses not to. He flies away on his dragon as his oldest friend, the only force in the world that could have stopped him, suffocates in ash. And the next morning, with the most powerful person in the world out of the way, Sozin begins his real war. He kills the air nomads first, because the next Avatar will be born among them. He tries to wipe out the cycle before it can be reborn into someone strong enough to oppose him. He fails, because Aang escapes, but the genocide goes ahead anyway. The hard truth the show wants you to sit with is that this entire chain of events, the war, the genocide, the 100 years of fire and grief, traces back to a friendship. Not to a stranger, not to a foreign army, not to an ancient prophecy, to one boy who loved another boy and could not bring himself to stop him until it was too late. Roku is, in his own story, partly to blame. He was too kind to his friend. He believed in their bond more than he believed in his own instinct. He gave warnings instead of taking action. He let the friendship cloud his judgment, and by the time he understood the scale of what he was facing, his friend had moved past anything friendship could touch. The show is honest about this. It does not soften Roku to make him a clean, tragic hero. It shows you that he had power, and he had warnings, and he had time, and he did not use any of them firmly enough, because the person he was trying to save was someone he had loved since they were boys. That is, in some ways, the cruelest claim in the whole show. The thing that destroyed the world was love. Not love misused or love perverted or love stolen and twisted. Just ordinary, stubborn human love between two friends, which became, by the small steps that all betrayals take, 100 years of fire. The show does not tell you this to be cynical about friendship. It tells you this to be honest about what friendship costs when it is unwilling to be hard. Iroh, who shares some of Roku's failings in his own friendships and family ties, has clearly learned this lesson. He is willing to be hard with Zuko in ways Roku was never willing to be hard with Sozin. He withholds love when it would damage Zuko to receive it cheaply. He waits. He sometimes refuses. He understands, because he has read history, that the friendship between Roku and Sozin was not destroyed by Sozin's ambition. It was destroyed by Roku's softness, and he is determined not to make the same mistake with his nephew. The friendship of Roku and Sozin is, in the architecture of the show, the cautionary tale at the center of every other relationship. It is the reason Iroh is firm. It is the reason Zuko, eventually, is firm with his own father. It is the reason the show, for all its warmth, has a streak of steel in it that never fully leaves. Ba Sing Se, the Great Walled City, is what happens when safety is pushed past its breaking point. It is the largest city in the world and the last great Earth Kingdom stronghold, a metropolis the size of a country, surrounded by two enormous walls, the outer one famous for never having been breached except by Iroh, and the inner one, a fortress in its own right. Inside those walls, the people of Ba Sing Se live what looks, on first glance, like a normal life. There are markets, there are universities, there are gardens, there are tea shops. The city, the deeper into it you go, is divided into rings, with the wealthy living closest to the palace at the center, and the poor living closer to the outer wall. It is a city the size of a small civilization, and it has been holding out against the Fire Nation for 100 years. It is also, when you look at how it has managed that, an enormous lie. The hidden cost of Ba Sing Se is that the price of the city's safety is the city's honesty. The Earth King, when our heroes meet him in the second book, does not know there is a war happening outside his walls. He has lived his entire life as the figurehead of a city whose actual administration has been quietly removed from him. The war, in Ba Sing Se, is not spoken of. There are no newspapers reporting on it. There are no veterans returning from it. There are no refugees admitting that there are battlefields beyond the wall, even though they themselves have come from those battlefields. There is a class of cheerful government employees, all called Ju-Di, all wearing the same smile, who walk visitors through the city and explain, in the same flat voice, that everything is fine. Anyone who insists otherwise is corrected. Anyone who insists too much is removed. The city has built itself a 100-year illusion, and the illusion is held in place by a force you do not see until you go looking for it. That force is the Dai Li, and they carry their own contradiction. The Dai Li were originally created by the avatar Kyoshi, the founding avatar of, among other things, an entire island, herself a daunting and complicated figure. According to the show, she established them to be the protectors of the cultural heritage of Ba Sing Se. They were meant to preserve what was good in the city, to defend its traditions, to be a kind of secret police of the soul. They were her gift to the city, given centuries ago, to keep its identity safe across the generations. And by the time we meet them in the second book, they have become almost the opposite of what she founded them to be. They are still secret, they are still police. But what they protect is no longer the city's identity, it is the city's illusion. They are not preserving the truth of Ba Sing Se, they are preserving the lie. The hard truth the show wants you to sit with here is that institutions outlive the reasons they were founded for. Kyoshi built the Dai Li with a particular purpose in mind, and the Dai Li exist now, several centuries later by most accounts, in a form that would horrify her if she could see it. The mechanism remains, the agents remain, the training remains, the discipline remains, but the actual work they do has drifted, over decades, from preservation to suppression. They started by protecting culture from invaders. They ended by protecting power from its own people. They have become the instrument by which Ba Sing Se imprisons its own citizens, the means by which the Ju-Dis stay cheerful, the hand that disappears anyone who notices that there is a war. The fall of Ba Sing Se, when it comes, is not a military defeat. It is a betrayal. Azula does not breach the wall the way Iroh did. She does not lead an army. She walks in through the back door, with 3 teenage girls, and she takes the city by quietly corrupting the institution that was supposed to be its last line of defense. The Dai Li, who have spent decades doing what Long Feng told them to do, find Azula more impressive than Long Feng and switch their loyalty without ever asking themselves whether they should. Long Feng is, in his own way, also undone by this. He thought he had built a tool that would only ever serve him. He thought he had outsourced the city's secrets to people he could control, and in the moment that mattered, those people made their own calculation about whose patronage would be most beneficial, and they chose her over him. The man who controlled Ba Sing Se by controlling the Dai Li learned, too late, that he never really controlled the Dai Li at all. He had just been the one giving them the orders they wanted to obey. There is a deeper rot in this, the thing the show is most quietly bitter about. The Dai Li are very good at what they do. They are skilled benders. They are disciplined. They are loyal in their own peculiar way. They have a kind of integrity even, an honor code among themselves, a sense of belonging to something larger than any one of them. And every single one of those traits is being put to work in the service of a project that, if you stepped back and looked at it, was indefensible. They are erasing the war. They are silencing dissent. They are kidnapping their own people. And they sleep, presumably, just fine at night, because the institution they belong to has told them that this is what they do, and the institution is centuries old, and who are they to question it? The Dai Li are the show's argument that good people can do bad things at scale if they belong to a structure that tells them this is normal. And the structure, in this case, was founded by an avatar with the best of intentions who never imagined what her gift to the city would become. Inside that broader paradox sits the strangest thing about Ba Sing Se, which is that it is, despite everything, beautiful. The episode called The Tales of Ba Sing Se, which takes you through a series of small stories from different residents of the city, is one of the most beloved episodes of the show. And it is beloved because it captures the actual truth of Ba Sing Se underneath the political truth. There are real people living there. They are kind to each other. They go to plays. They open their own little tea shops. They visit cemeteries. They sing on rooftops. The lie of Ba Sing Se does not erase the people inside it. It just keeps them from being able to act on the truth of their lives. The city is, even in its corrupted form, full of love and small acts of generosity. That is the most painful part. The illusion is not protecting nothing. It is protecting something real. And the cost of protecting it has been the citizens' ability to know the world beyond their walls and to act in it as fully human beings. The Northern Water Tribe, when the show takes you there in the first book, presents its own version of the same problem, although on a smaller scale and with less violence behind it. The Northern Water Tribe is, in every visible way, an admirable place. It has survived 100 years of Fire Nation assault. Its capital is an enormous ice city, defended by walls and waterbenders and an ancient knowledge of the moon and ocean spirits. It is the last place in the world where waterbending is still practiced at scale. It is, when Katara first sees it, the home she has been dreaming of without knowing it. The South Pole, where she comes from, is a shadow of what the North still is. Her tribe, her actual tribe, was reduced to a small village years ago, with one waterbender, who is herself. The North looks like a recovery of everything the South has lost. And then she tries to enroll in the waterbending school, and is told, very politely, that women in the Northern Water Tribe are not taught to fight. Women are taught healing. Men are taught combat. That is the way it has been. That is the way it will remain. Master Paku, the most accomplished waterbending teacher in the world, will not break this rule for anyone, including her grandmother's granddaughter, including a girl who has already learned more on her own than most of his students have learned with his guidance. The trap here is sharper than it looks. The Northern Water Tribe has preserved waterbending in a way the South could not, because the Fire Nation drained the South of its benders during the war. The North has been able to keep the tradition alive because it had walls thick enough and a culture rigid enough to hold the line. And the very rigidity that made that possible is now the thing keeping the tradition from being given to a girl who has already proven she would do it justice. The same conservatism that saved the culture is now choking the culture. The North has so feared losing what it has that it has stopped letting the culture grow into anyone who does not look like the version of it they have decided to preserve. Katara is what waterbending could become. Paku is what waterbending has been. And the show, with Katara fighting Paku to a draw in a duel he was certain he would win, suggests that the future of the bending belongs to the version that bends, and that the version that refuses to bend is going to break. What is gentle about this storyline is that the show does not punish Paku for his rigidity. It humbles him, but it humbles him in a way that allows him to grow. He discovers, partway through, that Katara's grandmother is also his ex-fiancée, that she fled the North decades earlier to escape a marriage she had not chosen, and that she is the woman he has been mourning his whole life without quite admitting it. Katara is, in some sense, the granddaughter he never had, and once he allows himself to see her as that, the wall he had built against teaching women cracks. He teaches her. He teaches the other women who want to learn. The Northern Water Tribe, by the end of the first book, has begun, in one small way, to change. The riddle of cultural preservation, which is that the only way to keep a culture alive is to let it transform, is solved here in miniature. Paku does not stop being Paku. He becomes a fuller, more honest version of himself, and waterbending becomes a fuller, more honest tradition. That is, by the way, the same dilemma the Sun Warriors are sitting on, and they have been sitting on it for much longer. The Sun Warriors are an entire civilization that decided, hundreds of years before the events of the show, to disappear. They are the original firebenders. They learned firebending from the dragons. They knew what fire was for, and when they saw, in the centuries that followed, that the rest of the world was beginning to use firebending in ways that betrayed its original purpose, they made a choice. They withdrew. They built their city in a remote place, surrounded by traps, and they pretended, to the rest of the world, that they had been wiped out long ago. They protected the truth about firebending by hiding it. They protected the dragons by killing the rumor that any dragons were still alive. They became, in effect, a culture in hibernation, a civilization in a vault, waiting for someone worthy enough to come knocking. The question is whether their choice was right. By preserving the original firebending, they made sure that, when Zuko and Aang finally arrived, the true source of the gift was still there to be taught. The Sun Warriors had not let it die. They had not allowed it to be diluted. They had kept it in its original form, ready for the moment when it would be needed again. That is, on a long enough timescale, an enormous gift to the world. They have saved firebending, in its true form, from the Fire Nation. They have saved the dragons, the last two of them, from extinction. They have, in a sense, ensured that there is still a thread back to the original meaning of their element, and that thread is what allows Zuko to become the firebender he becomes in the third book. And yet, while they were hiding in their city in the mountains, the rest of the world was learning to fear fire. While they were preserving the truth, the Fire Nation was teaching a lie, and the lie was the version of firebending that almost every person on the continent now believed. While they were holding the line for a future they could not predict, the Fire Nation was killing the air nomads. While they were waiting for the right student to arrive, an entire culture was being wiped out by people who had forgotten the very thing the Sun Warriors were guarding. The Sun Warriors were keeping a candle lit for a future that arrived. Eventually, the Fire Nation, in the meantime, was setting the world on fire. So the question the show invites you to ask, very gently, is whether the Sun Warriors should have come out of hiding earlier. Whether their preservation was, in the end, also a kind of complicity. Whether, by hoarding the truth instead of fighting for it, they let the world burn under the weight of the lie they could have corrected. The show does not give you a clear answer. It treats the Sun Warriors with respect when Aang and Zuko meet them. It honors their wisdom. It lets them be the teachers who finally give Zuko the version of his own bending that he needed all along. But it does not, in the same breath, let you forget the cost. The air nomads are gone. The dragons, all but two of them, are dead. The world has been at war for a century, and the Sun Warriors, in their secret valley, have been safe the entire time. The bitter truth of the Sun Warriors is the bitter truth of every group that has ever had a truth and decided to keep it private to keep it safe. The truth survived. The world that needed it did not. If the Sun Warriors are the secret guardians who hid for too long, the Order of the White Lotus is the secret guardians who waited for the right moment. They are, on the surface, a society of old men who play pai sho. They use the lotus tile as a recognition signal. They have members in every nation, in every walk of life, and most of the world has no idea they exist. They are, in the public eye, nothing. A club for the elderly, a group of men who have shared a love of an obscure board game across decades. That is, on the surface, all they are. What they actually are is the only multinational organization in the world that has resisted the Fire Nation's ideology from inside it. Iroh is one of them. Bumi, the king of Omashu, is one of them. Paku, the waterbender, is one of them. Jeongjong, the firebender who deserted the army, is one of them. Piandao, the swordmaster who teaches Sokka, is one of them. They are, in their separate ways, some of the most accomplished people in the world. They have known each other for years. They have, in their own quiet manner, been waiting. Waiting for what? The show does not explicitly tell you for most of the first 2 books. Waiting for the Avatar, presumably. Waiting for the right moment to act. Waiting, like all good secret societies and stories, for the day they have been preparing for. The unease the White Lotus carries is the unease of every patient resistance movement, which is whether you are doing the right thing by waiting. They have been members of an underground network for, in some cases, decades. They have not been openly fighting the Fire Nation. They have been moving in their own ordinary lives, doing their ordinary work, holding their secret meetings, playing their board game. And in the 3rd book, when they finally come together to take back Ba Sing Se, they do it almost effortlessly. 5 old men walk into the largest city in the world and reclaim it from the Fire Nation occupation in what looks like an afternoon. Iroh breaks the wall himself. Bumi crushes a tank with a single gesture. The city falls back into Earth Kingdom hands so quickly that you find yourself wondering, watching it, what they were waiting for. They were always this powerful. They could always have done this. Why was it only now? The honest answer the show gives, by implication, is that they were waiting for the Avatar. The Order of the White Lotus is not really a force that can change the war on its own. It is a force that can hold the ground that the Avatar wins. They could have taken Ba Sing Se earlier and lost it again in a week. They could have killed Ozai and let some other Fire Nation general take his place. What they could not do, on their own, was end the war. Only the Avatar could do that. So they waited until the Avatar was ready, and then they acted with him, on his timetable, on the strategic moment he chose. That is, in their defense, a coherent reason to wait. But the discomfort is still there. The years they spent waiting were years in which other people died. The villages they did not save while they were watching the Pai Show board could have been saved. The decisions they made in their own younger lives, when they were still serving the institutions they later turned against, made the war possible. Iroh, the most powerful member of the Order, was a Fire Nation general for decades. Pakku enforced the very traditions in the Northern Water Tribe that left half his people unable to fight. Bumi held Omashu by, in his own words, doing nothing for a long time, then surrendering when the Fire Nation arrived, then waiting again for the right moment. They are all, in their own ways, accomplices in the world they were also resisting. The Order of the White Lotus is the show's quietest reminder that resistance, even principled, even effective, even ultimately victorious resistance, is never as clean as you would like it to be. The people who finally saved the world are also, in pieces of their past, the people who let it become the world that needed saving. Kyoshi, the Avatar 2 before Aang, sits behind a particular puzzle the show never resolves, and that the franchise has spent the years since trying, in side stories and novels, to understand. Kyoshi lived to be 230 years old, that is, by the standards of the world of Avatar, an extraordinary span. The other Avatars, on the whole, live ordinary human lifetimes. Roku lived a long life, but a recognizable one. Kuruk died young. Aang dies, eventually, in the sequel series, at an age that is impressive but not impossible. Kyoshi lived for more than 2 centuries, and the show, in the episode where Aang meets her in the spirit world, treats this as a fact about her, not as a question. It tells you and moves on. The strange thing is that the show does not, within Avatar: The Last Airbender, ever explain why. There is no in-show account of how Kyoshi managed her longevity, or what it cost her, or whether her unusual span had anything to do with her unusual personality. She is the harshest of the past avatars Aang meets. She is the one who tells him, in flat words, that justice and revenge are essentially the same, and that he should not have qualms about ending Ozai's life. She is the one who admits that she killed Chin the Conqueror, the warlord who tried to take her island. She is the one who carved her own island off the mainland through a single furious act of bending. She is, in Aang's experience of her, certainty made into a person, and she lived almost long enough to be considered a folk creature rather than a woman. The longevity itself is the thread the show leaves dangling. If the avatar cycle is supposed to be regular, with each avatar yielding to the next within a normal human lifetime, then Kyoshi's 230 years are an anomaly. The next avatar after her, Roku, must have waited until she finally died, and that wait must have shaped him. Whoever was supposed to be born during her later decades simply was not, because the cycle could not move on until she let go. So Kyoshi, by surviving as long as she did, in some way altered the rhythm of the cycle itself. She delayed Roku, she delayed Aang, by a smaller but still real amount. She kept the next 4 avatars in their abstract in a kind of holding pattern while she went on being herself. The avatar cycle is supposed to be the great rotation of the world, the way each generation gets the bender it needs, and Kyoshi just held the wheel still for as long as she wanted to. The show does not blame her for this. It does not even comment on it. But once you notice it, you cannot quite stop noticing it. It is a small reminder that the avatar's role, for all its rules and rituals, is not as automatic as it sometimes looks. The cycle moves through individuals. Individuals have wills. An individual, if she is strong enough, can change the cycle's rhythm just by refusing to die. And if Kyoshi could do that, you have to assume that other avatars, in stories Aang never knew, made other, quieter alterations of their own. The cycle is presented to us as fixed. It might not be. It might be instead an idea that the world has made into a rule by everyone in it agreeing to act as if it were one, and the actual shape of the cycle, looked at over thousands of years, might be far less regular than the simple version Katara recites would suggest. The riddle compounds when you consider that, by the time you meet her in spirit form, Kyoshi has already lived multiple lives worth of human time, and has the regrets, presumably, that come with that. She lived through several wars. She buried many friends. She made decisions whose consequences she got to watch ripple out for 100 years, and yet, when Aang asks her for advice on the question of Ozai, she does not seem changed by any of that into someone gentler. She is, in spirit form, still the woman she was, still definite, still uncompromising, still willing to tell a 12-year-old boy that if you have to kill, you kill. The longest-lived avatar in the cycle, by the show's reckoning, is also the one who has, in some sense, learned the least from her life. Or, more charitably, she has learned what she had to learn early, and the rest of her 2 centuries simply confirmed it for her. Either way, it is a strange knot to leave in the audience's lap. Long life did not make Kyoshi softer. It made her, if anything, more herself. That kind of question, about what the avatar's role does to the person carrying it, runs underneath the whole show. The avatar is, in its official description, the bridge between the human world and the spirit world. That is the line every introductory description uses. It is a beautiful image. The avatar is the place where the 2 worlds meet, the person who can stand on the riverbank with 1 foot on each side. And like all beautiful images, it has another side to it that the show keeps showing you without ever quite stating it out loud. To be a bridge is to be walked on. To be the place where 2 worlds meet is to be pulled at from both ends. The avatar is the bridge, yes. The avatar is also the target. Every villain in the show ultimately wants the avatar destroyed. Sozin started a 100-year war by attempting to kill Aang's entire culture in order to break the cycle. Zhao tried to destroy the moon, partly so that the waterbenders he was fighting would lose their power, but also because the spirit world's chaos would weaken the avatar. Azula tried, in the Crystal Catacombs, to kill Aang in the avatar state so that the cycle would be permanently broken. Ozai, in his final form, dragged Aang up onto a rocky cliff and tried to incinerate him under the comet. The whole 100-year war can be read, in one telling, as a war against the Avatar, a war whose strategic objective from the Fire Nation's perspective was always to prevent the cycle from producing anyone who could oppose them. The Avatar, by being the bridge, is also the thing that has to be destroyed if anyone wants to break the world in their direction. The role makes you essential. It also makes you the thing that everyone with a project of world domination needs to take off the board. That is, on its own, a heavy weight to put on a 12-year-old. The show puts it on him with a strange kind of tenderness. It lets Aang be young about it. It lets him whine, occasionally, that he did not ask for this. It lets him take naps, lets him eat candy, lets him laugh at jokes. It does not turn him into a stoic warrior because of the size of the role. It just trusts that the audience can hold both things in their head at the same time, the role's weight and the child's lightness, and that the contrast is not a flaw, but the actual heart of the show. The Avatar is supposed to be the bridge between worlds, and on this particular generation, the bridge is a kid who likes apple pie. The show is asking you to find that funny and moving rather than embarrassing, and it works, because the kid is also, when it matters, the deepest soul in the room. The lightness is not in spite of the role. It is, in some way, the answer to it. He is the bridge between worlds because, of all the people who could have been chosen, he is the one who still remembers how to play. Sozin's Comet, which gives the show its final movement, carries its own contradiction, and one the show is careful with. The comet is, by the historical record of the show, a recurring phenomenon. It passes by once a century or so. Sozin used it, 100 years before the events of the show, to multiply the power of his firebenders and burn the air nomads. Ozai plans to use it, at the end of the show, to multiply his power and burn the Earth Kingdom, scorching it to ash so that he can rule what is left as Phoenix King over a continent of dirt and bone. The comet, in both of these uses, is presented as a kind of empowerment so vast that it changes what is possible. Firebenders during the comet can do things they could never do otherwise. The world, when the comet is in the sky, briefly becomes a place where the people on one side of the war have a power so disproportionate that the others have no defense against it. The strange thing is that the comet is not really a weapon. It is a cosmic event, an astronomical body, a piece of light moving through space. It does not choose sides. It does not know what the Fire Nation is doing with the gift it provides. It just passes by, every century, the way it always has. Sozin used it the first time because he happened to be ready when it came. Ozai is using it the second time because his grandfather built a war machine on the assumption that the comet would come again. The actual cosmic event is morally neutral. The use it has been put to is one of the worst atrocities in the show's history, and the quiet lesson the show plants in this is that timing makes the weapon. The comet would have done nothing if no one had been ready to exploit it. The comet, the second time around, is a danger because someone planned for a century to make it one. What makes this hurt, when you watch it, is that the comet is also beautiful. The show, when it depicts the comet streaking through the sky on the night of the final battle, gives it the same lush color and reverence that it gives the moon or the sun. It is a wonder. It is the kind of sight that, in any other context, you would step outside to admire. And it is for the people whose homes are being scorched under it and ending. The comet that the children of the Fire Nation would have, in a peacetime version of their country, gathered to celebrate as a national tradition, has been turned into the engine of a genocide. The same fire that, in the Sun Warrior's city, was used to bless the new year is, on the night of the comet, being used to burn villages. The double face of fire, life and death, plays out in macrocosm on this single night. And the show, in saying so, asks you to think about how often the things we call weapons were not weapons until someone decided to use them as such. The way the show resolves the comet is, in its own way, the answer to the same question. Aang does not stop the comet. He cannot. The comet is a piece of the sky. It will pass over no matter what he does. What he does instead is stop the person who was going to use it. He takes Ozai's bending away in the very moment the comet is at its peak. The fuel that was going to be poured into the engine never reaches the fire. The comet passes over, glorious, harmless, and the world below it survives because one person was disarmed at exactly the right moment. The show does not turn the comet into a villain. It lets the comet be what it is, a phenomenon, an enormity of light, and it puts the responsibility for what is done under it where the show has always put responsibility, which is on the people doing things. The comet is in the sky every century. What changes between one passage and the next is whether anyone has decided to weaponize it. The show, in this small detail, makes its quietest argument about everything else in the world. Power is not a moral category. People are. There is a related contradiction running underneath the show that is worth pausing on, even though the show only lifts it up explicitly in one episode and in scattered moments. It is the dark mirror of bloodbending. Waterbending, in its ordinary forms, is one of the gentler bendings in the show. It is the bending of healing. It is the bending of adapting. It is the bending that lets Katara, in a hospital, soothe a wound or knit a bone or take the heat out of a burn. It is, in the official idea of it, the most life-aligned of the bendings other than perhaps the original firebending of the Sun Warriors. And it is also, in the right hands and at the right time, the bending that can take control of a human body from the inside. Hama, the old woman Katara meets in the Fire Nation in the third book, has discovered this. She is a southern waterbender who was captured during the Fire Nation raids when Katara was younger, imprisoned for decades, and in the loneliness and rage of her imprisonment, she made a discovery. The water inside a living body can be bent, just as the water in a stream can. A person is, in some essential way, mostly water. A person can therefore, in the hand of a powerful enough waterbender, be moved like water. Hama discovered bloodbending in a prison cell, used it to escape, and has been carrying the secret of it ever since. She teaches it to Katara reluctantly, almost vengefully, on a full moon night, the only night when even a powerful waterbender can do it. Katara learns it. Katara uses it, once, in self-defense. And Katara, the show tells you very clearly with her face afterward, will never use it again willingly, because she has seen what holding another person's body in her hand looks like, from the inside. The horror of it is that the gentlest of the bendings, in its extreme form, becomes the worst of them. Bloodbending is not a kind of fighting. It is a kind of puppetry. It treats another human being as a thing. It is, by any moral measure the show has set up, an abomination. And the same person who can heal a child with her hands can, on the right night, with the right amount of fury, take over that child's body and make it walk. The two abilities, in the show's logic, are the same ability, deployed at different intensities. The healing is the gentle version. The bloodbending is the same gesture turned into violation. The show, in setting that up, asks you to look at all the bendings with new eyes. Earthbending heals roads and builds homes and crushes skulls. Firebending warms a room and cooks a meal and burns a forest. Airbending lifts a kite and calms a wind and, in the avatar state, levels a city. Every bending is, at the right intensity, the worst thing it can be. The art of bending, the actual art, is not in the power itself. It is in the choice not to use the worst version of what you can do. Katara never bloodbends again on screen. The implication is that she will never bloodbend again at all, because she does not want to be the kind of person who would. In the sequel series, generations later, bloodbending becomes one of the most feared and prohibited practices in the world. But in Avatar, The Last Airbender itself, the conversation around it is held mostly in Katara's face, in her refusal, in the way she puts the technique down and walks away. The lesson of bloodbending, in the show's framing, is the lesson of every power that can be used to violate another person. You can carry the knowledge of how to do it without doing it. You can know it and refuse it. The refusal becomes part of who you are. The strange truth is that the only safe place to put a terrible knowledge is in the hands of someone who has decided not to use it. And the only way to know whether that person has truly decided is to watch them, over and over, in moments when using it would be easier than not using it, and see them choose. Katara, by walking away from bloodbending, becomes more trustworthy than a person who never learned it. Her power is larger than other people's, and she refuses to use the largest version of it. That is the moral of the technique, in the show's careful handling of it. Bloodbending is wrong. Knowing how to bloodbend is not. What you do with the knowledge is the thing. There is a tension the show carries about destiny that is worth turning slowly in the dark. The world of Avatar is, in some real sense, a world that believes in fate. There is a cycle. There is a role. There are spirits who know things. There are guru figures who can read futures. There are people, like Aunt Wu in the first book, who make a quiet living telling fortunes that mostly come true. There is a strong implicit suggestion, especially in the first book, that the world is, in some measure, scripted. The Avatar is born when the world needs him. The people who help him appear when he needs them. The friendship that will end up reshaping the world begins in a small village in the South Pole, because, on some level, it had to. Destiny, in the world of Avatar, is a real force. And yet, almost every important decision in the show is made against destiny. Aang refuses the destiny his past lives have told him is his. Zuko refuses the destiny his father has told him is his. Iroh refuses the destiny his birth and his nation and his rank have told him is his. Sokka refuses the destiny of bending by carving out his own role beside it. Katara refuses the destiny the Northern Water Tribe has told her she has to accept. Toph refuses the destiny her parents have written for her in their drawing rooms. Every single one of the heroes, every single one of them, is at some point told by an authority figure that this is who they are supposed to be, and every single one of them, at some point, looks at that authority and says no. The strange thing is that the show is at once entirely sincere about destiny and entirely sincere about refusing it. It seems to want you to believe two things at the same time. The first is that the world is built on patterns that are real, and that the cycle of avatars, the lives that intersect to make a hero, the timing of the comets and the moons, are not coincidences. The second is that what you do with the destiny you have been given is what actually matters, and that anyone who hands you a destiny without your consent is, by that very act, doing something to be resisted. There is a real cycle. There is a real role. and there is also a real choice. The choice does not unmake the cycle, and the cycle does not unmake the choice. They are both true at once. The show makes this clearest, in some ways, in the way it treats Zuko's redemption. There are at least 3 different times across the show where Zuko is told, by people with weight behind their words, what his destiny is. His sister tells him his destiny is to be a great warrior at her side. His father tells him his destiny is to take back the throne. His uncle, in one of the show's most quoted exchanges, tells him that his destiny is something he can choose. Zuko, for most of the show, believes his father and his sister and refuses to believe his uncle, because the destiny his uncle is offering him is the hardest one. The hidden answer is that the destiny his uncle offered him was the one that was true. He was not, as it turned out, fated to be Ozai's heir or Azula's lieutenant. He was fated, in the show's gentle providential logic, to be the Fire Lord who ended the war. But he had to choose it. The fate was waiting for him. It would not come into being until he chose it. And so the show, by the time you reach the finale, has resolved its own paradox in a way that does not flatten it. There is destiny. Destiny is not coercion. The world has a shape that wants to be filled. The shape, until you step into it, is empty. You can step into it, or not. The shape is real, so is your foot. There is a small running joke through the show that I find I cannot stop thinking about, even though it has very little weight in any of the main plot lines, and that is the running gag of the cabbage merchant. He is, in some ways, the most consistent character in the show. He sells cabbages from a wooden cart. His cabbages are good cabbages by the look of them. He is trying, as far as we can tell, to make an honest living, and in episode after episode, in city after city, in entirely unrelated plot lines, his cabbages are destroyed. Aang lands on them. Appa knocks them over. Zuko crashes through them. A fight breaks out and they are crushed. A flying object catches him directly in his stall. The cabbage merchant, every time he appears, is robbed of his livelihood by an event having nothing to do with him. What is strange about this is that the show treats it as a joke and as a tragedy at the same time. It is funny because the timing is funny, and because the cabbage merchant's distress is dramatic in a way that is plainly absurd. It is tragic because, taken seriously, the cabbage merchant is a person whose life is being destroyed, repeatedly, by the heroes of the show, who never once stopped to apologize or compensate him. They never even seem to notice him. The world's salvation is being carried out, in some quiet measure, on the back of his lost cabbages. And the show, in lingering just long enough on his cries each time, asks you to consider, very gently, whether the great stories of heroism we love so much do not also, somewhere off stage, contain a cabbage merchant. Someone whose ordinary life is being crushed under the wheels of the hero's adventure, and whose name we never get to know, and whose loss we never get to count. The cabbage merchant is the show's quiet acknowledgement that even the saving of the world has its small, unredressed costs. It is a small, honest moment. The same actions that are saving everyone are wrecking someone, and the show, knowing this, plays it for laughs, because there is no other tone available for a truth this small and this true. Bumi, the king of Omashu, sits behind another idea the show is very fond of. He is 112 years old when Aang meets him. He is, at first, presented as a riddling old man, almost a senile one, who insists on calling Aang by a name Aang does not recognize. He turns out, by the end of his introductory episode, to be one of the most powerful earthbenders in the world, an old friend of Aang's from before the iceberg, and, in the show, the teacher who explains a philosophy of bending called neutral jing. Most fighters, Bumi tells Aang, use positive jing, which is attack, or negative jing, which is retreat. Neutral jing is waiting. It is doing nothing for as long as it takes for the right moment to arrive. And then, when the right moment comes, you do the thing you have been waiting to do. The hard part is that this is the strategy by which Omashu survives the war, and it is also the strategy by which Omashu falls. Bumi, when the Fire Nation arrives at his city's gates, surrenders. He goes peacefully. He spends months in a metal coffin in his own palace, watching the occupation, doing nothing. The city is occupied. People suffer. Bumi waits. And on the day of the eclipse, when firebenders briefly lose their power, he breaks out of his coffin, retakes his city in what looks like a single afternoon, and resumes his throne as if nothing had happened. The strategy worked. He saved his people from the slaughter that the other Earth Kingdom cities suffered when they fought back. He saved his city's character. He saved his city's stones. And yet, in the months that he was waiting, people in his city were being abused by the occupation. Children were going hungry. His subjects had to live under foreign boots. The strategy of waiting is also the strategy of letting bad things happen to people who do not know that you are waiting on their behalf. The cost of neutral Jing, in Bumi's case, is that it is brilliant on the strategic level and brutal on the personal level. The patience that is necessary to win, at scale, is the patience that means in the meantime, someone else is paying the price. Bumi understands this. He carries it. He does not pretend otherwise. He just decides that the cost is worth it, and the show, in giving him a sweet and silly demeanor that hides this depth, lets you decide for yourself whether he was right. There is a tension running through the Mechanist storyline that the show flirts with but does not fully resolve, and it is the tension of technology in a world of magic. The Mechanist lives at the Northern Air Temple, where he has, with the rest of the refugees, made a life for himself building inventions out of the temple's machinery. He builds hot air balloons. He builds gliders that allow non-airbenders to fly. He builds, when the Fire Nation finds him and forces his cooperation, weapons that the Fire Nation uses to terrible effect. He is, in his own person, a sweet and brilliant man. He loves his son. He misses his wife. He has built a life out of ingenuity. He is also, by the time you meet him, an unwilling collaborator with the very forces who eventually become the show's villains. The technology he has invented to save lives is being used to take them. The twist is that the show, in giving the Fire Nation an early industrial revolution, has set up an entire alternate axis of power that runs alongside bending and sometimes overlaps with it. The Fire Nation's metal warships, its drills, its tanks, are not powered by bending. They are powered by industry. They are powered by people building machines and pouring coal into them. The Fire Nation is not winning the war just because its firebenders are stronger. It is winning, in part, because it has industrialized before the rest of the world has. It has factories, it has supply chains, it has the Mechanist, whether he wants to be its asset or not, helping to design its next generation of weapons. Bending, in the world of the show, is a gift. Industry is something else. It is a structure that anyone, bender or not, can plug into, and the Fire Nation has plugged into it more deeply than any other nation. The deeper question underneath this is that the show is, all the way through, ambivalent about technology. The Mechanist inventions are wonderful when they help refugees fly, and terrible when they help soldiers conquer. Sokka, who is the most technologically minded of the main heroes, is the one who comes closest to working through this in his own person. He admires the Mechanist. He works with him. He builds, eventually, his own version of the Mechanist's gliders. He is, in some ways, the most modern character in the show, the one who thinks like an engineer, rather than a bender. And the show treats him with respect for this. It does not paint him as a betrayer of his world's traditions. It paints him as a person who is discovering, alongside the audience, that technology and bending can be partners rather than rivals, that a balloon can be just as miraculous as an airbender, and that the future of the world will probably have both. The question is not resolved cleanly, but it is held with grace. The show, in its quieter moments, suggests that the question is not whether to industrialize, but how to industrialize without becoming the Fire Nation. The deepest contradiction of all, the one the show is itself an instance of, is the contradiction of telling a story about war to children. Avatar, The Last Airbender is, in its broadcast home, a children's show. It aired on a children's network. Its merchandise was sold to children. Its early marketing leaned into its premise of a boy with a flying bison and a comedy lemur having adventures with his friends. And the actual content of the show is, when you sit with it, a sustained meditation on genocide, imperialism, the cost of revenge, the moral weight of killing, the cycles of trauma in families, and the slow erosion of cultural memory. It is a children's show in which an entire people group is wiped out before the first episode begins. It is a children's show in which the protagonist is the last surviving member of his civilization. It is a children's show in which a child is asked, in the finale, whether he is willing to take a life. The premise that a children's show could carry all of that, without flinching and without preaching, is the premise the show stakes its existence on. And it does carry it. The surprise is that this works, when by most reasonable measures it should not. There is a school of thought about children's media that says you should soften, that you should protect, that you should avoid topics like war and genocide and death because children are not ready for them. Avatar's quiet answer is that children are already living in the world. The world they are living in includes wars they have heard about, family members who have died, fears they do not have language for yet. A story that pretends those things do not exist is not protecting them. It is leaving them alone with their actual experiences and giving them nothing to think about them with. A story that meets them where they are, that says, yes, the world has terrible things in it, and here is what it can look like to face those things with kindness and patience and stubborn refusal to become the thing you are fighting, is a story that gives them a tool. It does not arm them with cynicism, it arms them with hope. And hope, by the show's account, is not the same as denial. Hope is what you can have once you have looked the worst of it in the face and decided, even so, to keep walking. The show's writers, in interviews over the years, have been open about how seriously they took this responsibility. They consulted historians. They consulted martial artists. They consulted cultural advisors for the various East Asian and Inuit traditions that the show draws on. They were determined not to flinch, and also not to brutalize. And what they came up with, episode by episode, is a kind of masterclass in how to be honest with children without being cruel to them. The air nomad genocide is in the show. The aftermath is in the show. The skeletons of the murdered monks are visible, in long shot, in the temple. The show does not show you the killing itself. It does not need to. It gives you the bodies, in the lotus position, and lets you understand. That is the show's philosophy in miniature. Tell the truth, do not gild it, do not wallow in it either. Give the child enough to understand, and trust that the child can understand. The reward is that the result is a show that, in being honest with children, becomes the most adult animated work many of them will ever encounter. The 8-year-olds who watched it in its original run grew up to be 20-year-olds, and then 30-year-olds, and the show kept rewarding them on rewatch with layers they had not been able to see the first time. The themes of grief, of imperialism, of the cost of forgiveness, of the difficulty of redemption, of the slow, patient work of becoming a better person, are themes that you keep returning to, and that keep meaning more. The show was written for children, and it grows with them. That is one of the few things you can say about a piece of media without it sounding like advertising copy. Avatar genuinely grows with you, and the lovely thing is that this was only possible because it refused, from the very beginning, to talk down to the child in the audience. It treated the 8-year-old as someone capable of carrying weight, and the 8-year-old, 20 years later, comes back to it with a different kind of weight, and finds the show already waiting. That carries with it a smaller, almost meta-contradiction, which is that the show is set in a world that visually resembles ancient and medieval Asia, with technology that is roughly 19th century industrial in places, and characters who speak in the kind of warm, modern dialogue that 21st century audiences recognize. The world is, in any literal sense, impossible. It is a mash of historical references that no single moment in real history ever matched. And the show is so careful with its references that the impossibility feels, instead, like an act of love. The architecture of the air temples is mountain monastery in the Tibetan tradition. The Fire Nation is a mix of imperial Japanese and Chinese motifs. The water tribes draw on Inuit and Yupik and other circumpolar cultures. The Earth Kingdom draws most heavily on imperial China, with regional variation. And the show, by combining all of these without flattening any of them, makes the case that respect is the price of borrowing. You do not get to take pieces of someone else's culture for your story without learning enough about them to honor them. The question of a fantasy world set in an Asian-inspired setting, written largely by an American team, is one the show has been openly debated about, in fan communities and in academic writing, for years. And the show, while not perfect on this front, made enough good choices, with enough humility, that it remains, 2 decades on, one of the rare American animated works that East Asian and indigenous viewers have largely embraced rather than rejected. That is, in its own way, a difficulty answered by care. Care does not eliminate the question of who has the right to tell which story. It does, however, make the story you tell more worthy of the people whose traditions you are borrowing from. There is a strange seam running through the show's handling of the spirit world that is worth pausing in front of, especially on a slow night like this. The spirit world, in the world of Avatar, is a real place. It is not metaphorical. It is not a dream. The Avatar can travel to it. Spirits, in some cases, cross over into the physical world. The moon and the ocean, in the first book, turn out to be living spirits with their own desires and griefs and bodies. briefly visible to Aang as koi fish in a pond at the heart of the Northern Water Tribe. Heibai, the forest spirit, walks into a village in the first book in monstrous form because his forest has been burned, and when his forest is restored, he changes back into a creature small and gentle and clearly grieving. The Face Stealer in the second book is a creature who steals the faces of the souls who do not keep their expression neutral in his presence. Each of these is shown to you with the same care the physical world is shown with. And yet the spirit world is, for most of the show, almost entirely absent from the main plot. Aang goes there occasionally. It comes up. It informs what is happening at the edges. But the actual plot of the war, the plot the show spends most of its time inside, takes place in the physical world, with physical weapons and physical decisions and physical consequences. The spirits, with one or two exceptions, do not intervene. They do not pick a side. They do not protect the temples or save the Avatar or smite the Fire Lord. They watch. They are, in some way, present in their own realm, and the realm runs parallel to ours, and the two intersect at the Avatar and at very few other places. The odd thing is that the show takes spirits entirely seriously and almost never lets them act. They are real, they matter, they have their own agendas, but the war is going to be won by people, not by spirits. The salvation of the world cannot be outsourced to the spirit realm. That is, in some way, the deepest theological statement the show makes. It would have been very easy, given the structure they had built, for the writers to let a spirit appear at the climax and resolve the conflict in a flash of light. They did not. They had the lion turtle, which is, in spirit terms, almost a god, give Aang a possibility. Then they had Aang use it. The thing that broke Ozai was, in the end, a human child making a decision. The spirits were there. They had to be willing for energy bending to even exist as an option. But the choice was Aang's and the consequences were his, and the world is saved by people who happen to make better choices than the people they were fighting. That is, in some sense, the answer to the deepest question the show carries about responsibility. Why does the Avatar exist at all if the spirits are real and could intervene? The answer the show implies is that the spirits exist on a different timescale and operate on a different logic, and that the physical world has to be tended by the people who live in it. The Avatar is not a divine intervention. The Avatar is the world's way of giving itself someone who can listen to both realms at once and translate between them. The spirits are there, they have things to say. They will, in their own way, support a person who is doing what the world needs done. But they will not do it for you. They will not save you. They will not, at the last moment, make the choice on your behalf. The show, in its quiet wisdom, lays this out as a fact about reality. The spirit world is real, and it is not going to rescue you. You have to walk through your own ending and make your own decision. The spirits will only be witnesses. That same loneliness of choice runs underneath the small but enormously important moment when Mai and Ty Lee, Azula's two oldest friends, finally turn against her. The two of them have spent the show in her service. Mai, the dour knife thrower with the bored eyes and the deep cynicism, is, by every appearance, the loyalist. Ty Lee, the cheerful acrobat who can paralyze other benders with precise strikes, is the friendliest. They are, on paper, exactly the kind of figures who, in a different story, would die with their leader at the end. They are, in fact, the friends Azula is least likely to imagine could ever betray her. And in the back half of the third book, they betray her completely. Mai chooses Zuko over her, in a single act, at the Boiling Rock, when Azula is about to kill him. Ty Lee, in the same scene, chooses Mai over Azula by paralyzing Azula on the spot to prevent her from carrying out her revenge. The hard truth is that the friendships Azula thought she had were, all along, more about the friends than they were about her. Mai and Ty Lee did not love Azula in any way that survived a real test. They feared her. They served her. They went where she pointed because they had been her companions since childhood, and the path of least resistance was to keep doing what they had always done. And the moment a path appeared that did not run through her, they took it. Mai took Zuko's safety. Ty Lee took Mai's safety. They each picked, in the moment they could pick, the person they actually loved, and Azula was not on either of their lists. What is striking about this, when you watch it now, is that the show does not condemn Mai and Ty Lee for their long service. It also does not particularly celebrate them for their defection. It treats both phases of their lives as honest representations of where they were at the time. They served Azula because she was the strongest person in their lives and because she had power over them. They defected when they had reason to. They are not heroes, they are not villains, they are young women who, like everybody else in this universe, are doing what they can with what they have. The reversal is that the same loyalty that made them dangerous in Azula's service makes them, when they finally turn it toward the people they actually love, beautiful. Loyalty itself is not a moral good, it is a force. What you point it at is what counts. And Mai and Ty Lee, by pointing it, finally, away from Azula and toward each other and toward Zuko, become, in the show's quiet logic, the people they could have been the whole time if anyone had asked them to. Azula, watching them go, does not know what to do with this. She cannot conceive of a friendship that is not also a transaction. She tries, in the moments after they leave her, to imagine what could have made them act this way, and the explanations she generates are all wrong. She thinks they were always weak. She thinks they were always traitors. She thinks she should have been harsher. She cannot let herself think the real answer, which is that they wanted, in the end, to be people, and that being her friend had stopped them from being people. The quiet lesson the show wants you to sit with here is that the most powerful person in any room is often the loneliest one, because power has a tendency to scare off the kind of love that does not show up because it has to. Azula has scared off every friend she ever had by being too good at being scary, and by the time she realizes this, she does not have anyone left to apologize to. There is one more figure the show contains that I want to spend a little time with before we close, and it is a small one, but it is the kind that sticks. Combustion Man, the assassin Zuko hires in the third book to kill Aang while Zuko is still officially a Fire Nation prince, has the rarest and most concentrated firebending ability in the show. He can produce, from a tattoo on his forehead, a beam of fire so concentrated that it explodes whatever it hits. He can do it from a great distance, he can do it precisely. He does not, in his short appearance, seem to do conventional firebending the way other firebenders do. His ability is, in the show's framing, a kind of rare specialty, a variation of the standard art that almost no one in his generation can do. The strange thing is that he is, by any practical measure, the deadliest firebender we ever see in the show. Ozai under the Comet is more powerful in raw output. Azula is more skilled overall. Iroh, in his quiet age, has more depth. But Combustion Man can kill a target from a hilltop with a single strike. He is the most concentrated bender in the show, and he is, by any reasonable storytelling logic, a dead end. He has no arc, he has almost no dialogue, he is hired, he attacks the heroes a handful of times, and he is killed by his own ability when Sokka's boomerang interferes with his focus and his explosion turns inward. What makes Combustion Man interesting, in the architecture of the show, is that he is a reminder that not every story is a story. Some people in the world are just dangerous, and then dead, with no neat reason behind them. The show, which is generally so good at giving every fighter a backstory and a redemption arc, gives Combustion Man almost nothing. He is a hired man, he kills for money, he fails and dies. That is his entire role, and the show, in being willing to include him without softening him into a more meaningful character, is making the quiet point that the world is full of people who are not arcs. They are forces. They appear, they cause damage, they are dealt with. The Cabbage merchant, on his side of the ledger, is a person whose ordinary life gets crushed by the hero's adventures. Combustion Man, on his side, is a person whose ordinary life is itself a crushing force, who shows up to do harm and is removed from the story when the harm has been prevented. The curious thing is that, in a show otherwise committed to the depth of every character, two of the most memorable figures, the cabbage seller and the combustion specialist, are essentially functions. They are pieces of the universe doing what pieces of the universe do. They keep the show, in its way, honest. The world is not, the show admits, a story that is exclusively about the people we choose to focus on. There are merchants, there are killers, there are people who pass through. The Avatar's job is not to give every one of them an arc. The Avatar's job is to leave the world a little better than they found it, and to accept that some of the smaller details will simply be what they were. And that, in some way, is the final shape of Avatar, the Last Airbender, the one all the others rest underneath, the one the show is willing to say only by example rather than statement. The world the show shows you is a world that, for all its bending and its spirits and its cosmic phenomena, is moved primarily by people, by their choices, by their willingness to be a little kinder than they have to be, by their refusal, when the moment comes, to do the worst version of what they could do. The Avatar can take a Fire Lord's bending away. The Avatar cannot take a Fire Nation citizen's fear away. That has to be done by the Fire Lord who comes after, by the friend who finally writes to her exiled cousin, by the school teacher who finally tells the truth in class, by the next generation. The war ends. The peace, in the show's understanding, has to be built. And it has to be built by people who, having seen what the worst version of their world looks like, decide every day to live as the better version. That is what the show, when you peel back all of its paradoxes, is finally saying. The world will be saved by a child making a hard choice on a comet-lit night, and then it will be made habitable by 1,000 smaller choices made by people who never appear on screen, in towns we never visit, in conversations that happen quietly between the next generation of mothers and fathers and teachers and farmers. The Avatar lights the candle, everyone else has to keep it burning, and the show, in walking away from its world at sunset on a balcony in Ba Sing Se, trusts you to believe that they will. Before we close, there are 2 or 3 smaller threads the show carries that I want to gather up, because they sit in the corners of the larger story, and they do their own quiet work, even when you do not notice them. The first is Jet, who appears in the first book and again, briefly, in the second, and whose entire purpose in the story is to demonstrate the danger of righteous fury. Jet leads a group of Earth Kingdom orphans, the Freedom Fighters, who live in the trees and ambush Fire Nation patrols. He is charming. He is brave. He is, when Sokka and Katara meet him, the kind of figure a teenager would have a poster of. He fights the Fire Nation. He saves villagers from Fire Nation soldiers. He is, on the surface, a hero. And then you watch what he is willing to do. He plans to flood an Earth Kingdom town to wash away the Fire Nation soldiers stationed there, accepting, with a kind of strategic calm, that the Earth Kingdom civilians in the town would also drown. He has decided, somewhere in the years his trauma has been forming him, that the cause justifies the dead. He has become, in his own self-image, a freedom fighter, and in the show's logic, a terrorist. The discomfort is that he is genuinely fighting a real evil. The Fire Nation is occupying his country. They did, when he was a child, kill his family. His rage is not invented. His enemies are not imaginary. And he has, in the long burning of that rage, become the kind of person who is willing to kill innocents in pursuit of his cause. The show, in showing him to you, asks you to feel the pull of his cause, and then to see, with horror, the exact line at which the cause swallows the cause's own justification. Jet's later appearance, in the second book, is even more painful. He has by then been brainwashed by the Dai Li in Ba Sing Se. He is trying to do the right thing. He is trying to expose Longfeng's corruption, and he is, by the end of his arc, killed, off-screen, in a way the show never directly confirms but everyone understands. He dies in the basement of the city he was trying to save, at the hands of an institution that should have been on his side. The tragedy of Jet is that the boy who was willing to drown innocents to free his people is also the boy who, having tried to climb back up out of that pit, gets killed for trying to do the right thing in a system that has lost the ability to recognize it. He is both the worst version of what resistance can become and a casualty of the very system that any honest resistance would have to oppose. He is, in his own small way, the show's argument that there is no clean moral position in a war that has gone on too long. Everyone, by the time the war is in its last stretch, has been compromised by something. The only question left is whether you find your way back, and Jet, for all his fierce trying, does not get the chance. The Painted Lady, an episode set in a Fire Nation village in the third book, sits behind a different question, smaller but in some ways more uncomfortable. Katara discovers, in a small fishing town, a community that is being slowly poisoned by the runoff from a Fire Nation factory upstream. The river is filthy, the children are sick, the villagers believe a river spirit called the Painted Lady will, in time, come to help them, but no one has seen her in years. Katara, moved by what she finds, dresses up as the Painted Lady at night and goes out into the village to help. She heals the children. She drives off Fire Nation soldiers. She becomes, in the village's eyes, the spirit they had been waiting for. And she is not. She is a teenage waterbender from another nation, using their faith as a costume for her own intervention. The trouble is that the help she gives is real. The healing is real. The fear she scatters in the Fire Nation soldiers is real. She destroys the factory upstream and gives the villagers the chance to recover their river. The intervention works, and yet she is, in being the fake painted lady, lying to people whose faith was already fragile. She is using their belief in a spirit she does not believe in as the costume for her own action. The show, when this is finally raised, lets her offer a small defense. The spirit, she says, was not coming. The villagers were going to die. And then she leaves, knowing that the villagers will continue, after she is gone, to believe in the painted lady. The painted lady will, in their stories, have been real and have come back and have saved them. The truth will be whatever they need it to be, because the truth, in this case, is less helpful to them than the story. The question is whether what Katara did was right. The show does not give you a clear answer. It treats the question as worth holding rather than worth deciding. And underneath the question is the larger problem of every act of intervention from outside. Every traveler who passes through a community and helps it without staying. Every hero who does the right thing in a story that is not theirs. You can help. You can save lives. You can also, in the helping, take away from the people you are helping the ability to know what really happened to them. The show, in giving Katara that costume and that mission, asks you to feel the weight of both gifts at once. She did good. She also, in some small way, did not let the village have the truth. Whether the village is better off for it is, the show implies, not really a question with a clean answer. There is one last slight the show plays for laughs and then, characteristically, sneaks the seriousness back in, and it is the episode called The Ember Island Players, which sits right before the 4-part finale. The heroes, hiding in the Fire Nation in the days before the final battle, go to a theater on Ember Island and watch a play about themselves. The play has been written by a Fire Nation playwright who has heard the rumors about the Avatar and his companions and has, with the slight cruelty of a satirist, dramatized them. The play gets almost everything wrong. The Aang in the play is played by a woman, and the play makes him a vain, fluttering, somewhat foolish boy. The Katara in the play is sweetly maternal and constantly weeping. The Sokka in the play is purely a goof. The Toph in the play is, of all things, played by an enormous muscular man, because the playwright cannot imagine a tiny blind girl being the most powerful earthbender in the world. The Zuko in the play is brooding and stiff. The Aang of the play even dies at the end, killed by Azula, because the playwright does not know that Aang survived. The heroes, watching themselves be misrepresented in front of an audience that has no idea who they actually are, sit in the back of the theater and squirm. The clever thing is that the show is, in that single episode, looking at itself in a mirror. The play is the show, slightly distorted. The play is what would happen if the show was watched by people who only half understood it and translated it into broad caricature. And the show, in writing this play within itself, is simultaneously laughing at its own cliches and asking the audience to think about how easily a story can be flattened. The Aang of the play is a parody of how some viewers had, by then, started writing him. The Katara of the play is a parody of how the show's own writers had, sometimes, leaned on her tendency to mother the group. The episode is criticism and self-criticism at the same time. It is the show looking at its own reflection and being honest about the funhouse aspect of the image. What makes it more than a clever exercise is the way the show uses it. The heroes, watching themselves be misrepresented, also see, in pieces of the play, ways they have actually behaved. The Zuko of the play, scowling and stiff and unable to admit affection, is closer to who Zuko has actually been than he is comfortable with. The Sokka of the play, all jokes and no substance, is the role he has sometimes let himself slide into. The Aang of the play, who refuses to acknowledge what the world needs him to do, is a version of how Aang has, at moments, behaved. The play is wrong about a lot of things. It is right about more than they would like. And the lesson the show wants you to sit with is that the way other people see you, even when it is unfair, often contains a clue about a part of yourself you have not been willing to look at. The play is, in this strange light, a gift. It tells the heroes things they would not have heard from each other, and it tells the audience, by the end, that the show knows about every cliché it has been playing with, and that it has been using them on purpose, and that the truth of the characters is what those clichés have been pointing toward all along. What the play also does, by ending with Aang's death at Azula's hands, is give the heroes a moment of horror about a possible ending they have not yet ruled out. The play imagines them losing. The play imagines Aang dying. The play imagines the Fire Nation winning the Comet's day. And the heroes, who have to walk out of the theater and go fight that very battle the next day, get to feel, in the safety of bad theater, how heavy a loss would be. They get to grieve, in advance, in the shape of a stranger's misimagining, and then they get up the next morning and go to work, knowing what they would be losing. That is, in its way, a use of fiction that the show takes seriously. Fiction lets us practice feeling things we have not yet been required to feel. The play within the show is the show's own argument for why it itself, the larger show, matters. You watch heroes you do not know, in a story you have not lived, and you feel things in advance that prepare you, in some small way, for the feelings your own life will eventually bring you. The Ember Island players are a bad play. The show that contains them is a good one. And the gentle paradox of fiction itself, the smallest one, is that even a bad play can do good work. And even a good show, watched poorly, can become a flat misreading. The show is asking you, in showing you the play, to be a careful viewer of every story you will ever encounter, including this one. The truth, the show says, is in the details. Watch closely. Do not let the cliches flatten the people. Notice the small choices. Notice who is tired in the corner of the frame. Notice the cabbage merchant. Notice the spirit world refusing to intervene. Notice the boy refusing to kill. The story is bigger than the headline. The story, in Avatar, is always in the way the show holds its paradoxes without trying to dissolve them. They are meant to be carried, not solved. And carrying them, in the end, is how you grow up. Which brings us, finally, to the end of the night, and to the question of what to do with a show this rich and this contradictory once you have spent your hours with it. Avatar, The Last Airbender, is, by now, almost old enough to vote. It first aired in 2005 on a cable channel that was, at the time, mostly known for slime. The people who watched it as children are, many of them, adults with their own children now. The show has been re-released, re-streamed, rediscussed, novelized, sequelized, comicked, animated again in different forms, adapted into a live-action series, adapted again into a different live-action series, and it has, by now, an enormous body of writing surrounding it. People have written master's theses about it. People have written novels in its world. People have built entire careers studying the small choices its animators and writers and voice actors made. And the show, somewhere underneath all of that response, is still the show it was. 3 books, 61 episodes, a boy in an iceberg, a girl with snow in her hair, a brother with a boomerang, a bison who only flies when he wants to, a villain who is also a child, a wise man who is also a former general, an ending in which a boy refuses to kill and is right. The reason it has lasted, I think, is not its action, although the action is good. It is not its humor, although the humor is honest. It is not even its world building, although the world building is some of the most careful in the medium. It has lasted because, more than almost any other piece of media made for children, it took its audience seriously. It assumed they could hold weight. It assumed they could think about the cost of choices. It assumed they could find their way through paradoxes without needing the paradoxes solved for them. It treated them, in other words, as people. And the people who watched it as children have grown into adults who are still grateful to the show for treating them, even briefly, as something more than a market. The quiet miracle of a children's show that took its audience this seriously is that it produced a generation of adults who have, in some quiet, measurable way, been shaped by it. They are kinder, maybe. They are more patient with their own anger, maybe. They are more willing to forgive without forgetting, maybe. None of that can be proved. But it would be a strange coincidence if a show as gentle and as serious as this one did not, somewhere, slip a little of itself into the people who let it in. So if you have made it this far, drifting towards sleep with the last of the words around you, the only thing left for me to say is what the show itself, in its way, has always said. The world is full of paradoxes. The Avatar is one in many. The pacifist has to end a war. The wise man was once a soldier. The friend was once a killer. The destiny is real, and the choice is real, and the spirits will not save you. And the comet is coming, and there is still time, even so, to be the person you want to be. The hardest contradiction of all is just being a person at all, holding all of your own contradictions in your hands, and trying to act well anyway. The show, in its 61 episodes, makes the case that this can be done. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but it can be done. By children, by old men, by sisters, by exiles, by the last surviving members of vanished cultures, by the people we tend to underestimate. The show is, in the end, a long, quiet act of trust in human beings. And if a story can do that, it has done about as much as a story can do. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.